All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our third webinar in the IFAS Research Forum series. I'm Damian Adams, Interim Associate Dean for Research. I'm very happy to open the meeting. Today, we will be presenting 3 sessions, including brief breaks. The first will be what goes into a report project, positioning yourself for internal funding success, moderated by Dean Kopsel, Chair of Environmental Horticulture. At 9 a.m., Professor Doug Archer from Food Science and Human Nutrition will lead a panel discussion on considerations in developing the research section of your Tnp packet. And finally, at 10 a.m., a session on writing accountability and other NCFDD programs will be led by moderator Brian Ibani, eminent scholar in entomology and nematology. We have a tight schedule this morning, so I'll briefly remind everyone that you can enter your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Answered questions will appear as they are addressed. Now I'd like to introduce our first moderator, Dean Kopsel.
Thank you, Damian. Welcome everybody to the third session of the IFAS Forum Research Seminar Series. This morning we're going to talk about report projects. We have 4 great presenters. The first is Ms. Dana Holt. She is going to talk about the administrative overview of report projects. Dana is the Assistant Director of Finance in the Office of Research for IFAS, and she's also the USDA Nifa Report Coordinator for IFAS. She's been in her position for 5 years and serves with the Florida Agriculture Experiment Station, where her principal duties include working with departments with financial and human resources matters and serving again as the report coordinator. Our second presenter is Dr. Hector Perez in the Environmental Horticulture Department. He specializes in seed biology and plant conservation. Dr. Perez was just promoted to full professor this last cycle, so congratulations again, Hector. His research program takes on interdisciplinary approaches, blending seed biology with plant restoration and endangered species conservation. And Hector will be speaking about multi-state report projects. Our third presenter is going to give us a unit leader's review or review of the report projects. Dr. Blair Siegfried is professor and chair of the Entomology and Nematology Department in IFAS. Blair's been in this position for almost 5 years, and he's been an expert in insect toxicology and resistance management. His research was actually dedicated to looking at the ecological risks of pesticide use and advancing the understanding of insecticide resistance evolution within some of the harmful plant or insect species. And rounding out the 4 speakers this morning will be Dr. Matt Cohen, who is a professor in the School of Forest Resources and Conservation. Dr. Cohen joined SFRC in 2006. His primary research area is in watershed hydrology and biogeochemistry with an emphasis on wetland processing. And Dr. Cohen is going to talk about Mcintyre Stennis. So with that, thank you again, all of the speakers, for volunteering for this session. And I will pass it on to Dana, and she will lead us off.
All right, thank you, Dr. Kopsel. I'm Dana Holt, and I'm going to be talking about reports Monday morning. Let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. All righty. So hopefully you can see the United States of America. Everybody hopefully can see that right now. Great, great. Okay. So as we all know, I am here to talk about kind of the administrative part of report. First off, I want to just do a general overview. We are a land-grant institution. We are a 1862 institution in Florida, as is our sister Florida A&M is a 1890. Since their inception, land-grant institutions have broadened out to encompass programs of on-campus instruction, research, and off-campus extension work in many areas beyond the initial educational needs of the agricultural and industrial classes. Several acts have been passed since 1862 that have expanded the scope and increased the support of the land-grant program. In all, there are 105 land-grant colleges and universities stemming from the 1862, 1890, and 1994 federal legislation. All right. Okay, so what are capacity grants? They are administered by Nifa. These programs ensure that the land-grant university system and other partners maintain the capacity to conduct research and extension activities. The current federal appropriation to states for the land-grant systems amounts to more than $550 million per year. The amount of funds provided to each institution is determined by a formula, which is why they used to be called, as many knew, formula grants for formula funds. These are often statutorily defined and may include variables such as population, farm population, and poverty rate. All right. So here at the IFAS Dean for Research Office, we manage these big four, is what I like to call them. Hatch Regular program, which is general agricultural research. So that's going to be the majority of our portfolio here. Hatch Multi-State program, which is planned research between multiple states or regions, multiple universities. Mcintyre Stennis, which is forestry, and we'll talk about that today. And animal health, which right now is focused in our College of Veterinary Medicine. Our extension now manages the Renewable Resources Extension Act, Expanded Food Nutrition Education Program, and the Smith-Lever programs. So that's different. But for us right now, these four research programs that our office manages are the Hatch Regular, Hatch Multi-State, Mcintyre Stennis, and Animal Health. Each of these programs can be a maximum of 5 years, each of these projects. Okay, so the benefit of capacity funding. It promotes multi-institutional collaboration. It provides us with the flexibility to address local and regional emergencies while still being able to sustain our long-term research programs. And it strengthens the infrastructure here at the University of Florida. Okay, so reports, many of you have heard of it. It actually stands for Research, Education, and Extension Project Online Reporting Tool. It's a mouthful, so that's why we just call it reports. It's NIFA Singular Grant and Capacity Project Reporting System. Everything, all the reporting, the initiation, the progress reports, the financial reports, it all takes place in the report system. It's a modular system. And it's made like that because NIFA needs a way to go in there and pull information easily. What they do is a way of them tracking the type of research we're doing here at the University of Florida. So for example, if there's an environmental issue, say root pests or mold or clean water initiatives, NIFA will be able to search for subject matter experts and reach out. So that's why everything has to be done within this system, in this modular system. Okay, like I said, it's a system where NIFA can go in there and search for subject matter experts. It's also very important for public facing as well. A lot of the evidence of performance that we use, that we have in the report system is used in congressional inquiries. It's used in scientific emphasis area evaluation. So this information is very, very important for NIFA to have and for us to enter properly. So why do we have report projects? We are land grant, as I hit on at the beginning of this presentation, and so we receive capacity funding every year to support salaries and research expenditures. Based on the four programs I mentioned at the beginning, we get about roughly $5 million in funding from NIFA for each of these. Faculty must have a report project in order to spend this funds. If not, then we're not able to do that. Projects serve as an accounting link for us for the expenditure of funds within IFAS. And every year, we have roughly right now about 346 active projects. Every year around February 1st, our office has to submit a financial report where we report on the expenditures of each and every project that UF has. So it's very important that we have that project and that accounting link so we can keep track of what's spent by project. And also having a project as well, it qualifies you for pretty much most of our internal awards, such as early career, the internship program, equipment and infrastructure, et cetera. And most recently, I believe there's an FNGLA announcement that went out, same thing, where it's a requirement to have a report project. Now in general, folks must have an active report project if they have a research appointment. And I know that can be a gray area, but in general, if you have a research appointment and for this presentation, and also if you do receive a USDA NIFA competitive grant, NIFA requires that grant be set up in a separate project. So they want all the reporting, all the financial reporting to be done within a separate project. So you could have a capacity project and a competitive grant if you do receive those. So NIFA will set up that as well. Okay. So how do you get one? So this is what the portal at NIFA is going to look like. It's going to have a nice picture. Usually it'll change. What you're going to do is go to portal.nifa.usda.gov, enter your email address and password. Your password is not the same as the one here at the University of Florida. You can click reset password. It works just as fine, especially for folks that go in here maybe once a year to do their progress reports and don't remember. If you go ahead and click reset password, it will very quickly send an email to your UFL account. Next, when you log in, I want you to be able to see this active application at the bottom of the screen. It's called Report SAES University of Florida. If you do not see that, then please reach out to us because we need to get you the role so you can be able to get into the system. Okay. And next thing you're going to see is it's going to be a little graphic. You can either click at the top or click within the graphic. You're going to click Project Initiation. It's going to go to an initiation page. You're going to click Create a New Project. It's as simple as that. And so what will happen is when you create a new project, you'll click the funding source, which is going to be Hatch Multi-State Mcintyre Stennis, and then it'll take you through each of the modules. And it's pretty, you just follow through the modules, fill out the requested information, and go ahead and submit it. Okay. So here at the University of Florida, as of this weekend, because it changes all the time, we have 346 active projects. So Hatch Regular is our biggest. That takes up 69% of our portfolio. And as you can recall, Hatch Regular is general agricultural research. So that makes the most sense that most folks would be in this category or under that program. Hatch Multi-State comes out second at 17%. Mcintyre Stennis is 12% of our portfolio right now. And Animal Health rounds it out at 2%. So I just kind of give you an idea that most of our faculty here do have Hatch Regular, which is general agricultural. It's a 5-year general scope of work of what you want to accomplish within the next 5 years is the max. So how do you get it? So for Hatch Regular, Mcintyre Stennis, and Animal Health projects, a proposal is required. So you're going to go ahead and create your proposal. At the, here, as an internal request, we ask that you send it to 3 subject matter experts. They can be here at the University of Florida. They can be outside the University of Florida. We just want someone to put eyes on it and kind of give you some meaningful feedback before it goes off to your reviewer at Nifa. So once you've done that, go ahead. There's an internal form that we fill out here, and that's going to be on our website. And go ahead and initiate your project as I've just gone through and report. You can do it at the same time. That's fine. You know, and if you have something to update, you can go ahead and update it and report. What happens when you initiate, it'll save your project as a draft. You can go back at there at any time and update as needed until you're ready to submit it for Nifa to approve. Now, Hatch Multi-State is a little bit different because Hatch Multi-State has already been approved as a regional project. So what happens is with Hatch Multi-State projects, those are approved in a system called NIMS. That stands for the National Information Management and Support System. That houses all of NIFA's multi-state approved projects. So if someone wants to join a project, they have to go into the NIMS system, join the project, then go into the report system and initiate a corresponding project. That is often a step that some people forget to do, that there's a 2-step process. So you have to go into NIMS and then you go into report. Those 2 systems will talk to each other. So once you go into report, you'll just click the multi-state project you're a part of, S1, 2, 3, 4, and those objectives will roll over into the report system, and you're able to go from there and fill it out. But a proposal is not required, like I said, because this has already been approved on the national and regional level by Nifa. And for all of our programs, you will need the Responsible Conduct of Research training, which is the RCR training. And again, I will be reaching out to you, and there's also information on our website regarding that training as well. Okay, so reporting requirements. So for capacity funded projects, you've got a progress report that's going to be due every year, and it always falls on the federal fiscal year, no matter when it started. I have folks that may have started, you know, 1 month before the year ended. You still have to do a progress report. Now that report's going to become due on September 30th as the end of the federal fiscal year. But Nifa, they give you about 5 months to complete that progress report. So they're pretty nice about that. They give us until March 1st as a drop dead deadline to get your progress reports into Nifa every year, and that is done through the report system. Final reports, same thing. They're going to be due March 1st after the end of the most recent fiscal year. So that no matter what time, when your project ends, it could end at any time, that progress or that final report, needs to be done and in by March 1st. Now, please, folks, if you do leave the University of Florida, please go ahead and submit your final report. That can be submitted at any time to close your project and report. Unfortunately, if you do go to another land-grant university, these projects cannot follow you. So you will need to go ahead and close this down and open a new one at the new university. So unfortunately, we can't send it with you. So please remember to close your projects down if you do leave. Okay. And as an end, I do work with Nancy Wilkinson and Kat Carter-Finn in the Dean for Research office, and this is our contact information in case you have any questions at all. And I think that sums it up for me, and I will, like I said, I'll be here to answer any questions, and I'm going to stop share. And Dr. Kopsel, it's back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Dana.
No problem.
Really appreciate that background information and the kind of the mechanics of what goes into a report project, and certainly the reporting that we all have to follow as principal investigators. Okay, so the second speaker of the morning is going to be Dr. Hector Perez, and Dr. Perez is going to talk about multi-state projects. Hector.
Let me share my screen here. Okay, so are we seeing everything here? Are we seeing the?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, so between June 9th and June 12th of this year, Alachua County registered an 1,100% increase in new COVID-19 cases. And this alarming spike was linked to transmission within a migrant farm worker community. And almost exactly as this news was breaking, we started hearing calls from the highest levels of the state government for IFAS to find solutions to this problem. But what exactly was the problem? Yes, of course, there was a concerning increase in COVID-19 cases, but is that really what's driving this? Or is the problem really that the essential workers who harvest the foods that we eat often face some harsh working and living conditions, such as cramped transportation or cramped housing? Or is the problem that these essential workers actually need to migrate from one state to the next, usually in a northward fashion as the harvest season progresses, so that they can find enough work to support their families and either stay just below, at, or just above the poverty line? If you take a step back, what emerges is that these inherently agricultural problems of a socioeconomic nature are not just limited to Florida. So remember, these migrant workers are going from Florida to Georgia to South Carolina looking for work. So in fact, these types of problems and many other types of agricultural problems persist throughout the southern region. So here's a map of USDA's southern region, and you can see that it's a pretty vast area encompassing 13 states and 2 territories. Now, what's interesting about this region is that despite all the agricultural idiosyncrasies between states, there are many significant agricultural problems that are similar across states within the region. And just to give you an idea, there's currently 35 active multi-state research projects in the southern region, investigating everything from plant genetic resources and breeding, to sustainable crop production, to microbial control of arthropod pests, to aging in rural America. And the point here is that there's really no shortage of individual agricultural problems that affect more than one state in the region. And really, that's why most of you are here today, right? So you have a great idea for a new project to address a significant agricultural problem of regional concern, but you may not be entirely clear on how to make that happen. So you'd like to know how to go from your idea to a new multi-state research project. And after all, most of us got into ag and natural resources research so that through our research efforts, we could be in a place where we produce impacts that benefit the environment, benefit our communities, benefit different types of agricultural production systems. So in short, we want to be benefiting agriculture and we want to be benefiting society. And we can do that through a multi-state research project. So what I want to do is help you on your journey to creating a new multi-state research project by revealing 3 key ideas that I think will help facilitate development and submission of your proposal. So the first key idea is recognizing the process. Now, obviously, in order to start the process, you need that idea that's going to address a significant agricultural problem of concern to more than one state in the southern region. What I mean by this is that the problem that you're confronting cannot readily be addressed by one experiment station alone. So by definition, a multi-state research project includes researchers at different agricultural experiment stations throughout the region. But one important thing to remember is that you can include researchers from industry and from government, and that's actually encouraged. So think about that as you're developing your project. Who are the groups of people that you want to have involved in this project? So as you're thinking about this, you're also going to want to identify a critical mass of colleagues who are willing to help write the proposal. Now, once you've identified this critical mass, you can continue on to the more official parts of the process, which I'll outline here in just a moment. Okay, so you have your idea, you have this critical mass of colleagues that are going to help write the proposal. The next step is to contact the research deans in the Ag Experiment Station. And I just like to say that Dana Holt is a superstar in this regard. So if you have questions, Dana's a good person to ask for any kind of direction on how to make this happen. But the reason you want to reach out to the research dean's office is because they're going to help find what's called an administrative advisor for the project. And this administrative advisor is housed in the group of experiment stations, which I'll show you in just a moment. But that administrative advisor is going to help navigate you and your group through this process, and they're going to help through the life of the project as well with annual reviews and 5-year project reports. So make that contact. Once you do that, then you're going to see that you can actually go into NIMS, which Dana mentioned earlier, and prepare a development committee request. And as you prepare that request, you're also going to work in something called Appendix A, which I'll show you in just a few moments. But in Appendix A, what you're going to do is submit essentially a pre-proposal. So a brief pre-proposal that discusses the issues and the justifications for why this multi-state research project needs to exist. So you're going to upload that information into the NIMS system. And then from there, the pre-proposal is going to go through administrative review. And most likely your developmental committee is going to get approval. This is good. So they'll give you up to 24 months to write this proposal. So that's key. So getting that developmental committee approval is going to be key. Once you get that approval, then you could go on to developing the full proposal, and you're going to do that in Appendix A in the NIMS system. At the same time, you're going to suggest some scientific peer reviewers to review the proposal. So think about who you might want to suggest to serve as those peer reviewers. After that, you're going to have an opportunity to respond to the reviews and submit the final proposal. Now, that final proposal that you've submitted is going to go through another level of review with the Multi-State Research Committee. So they're going to review it. They're going to come back and give you comments. You're going to have a chance to respond to those comments and then submit your, I guess would be your final proposal. That goes into the system and it's reviewed and approved at the highest levels within the system. And then you're on your way. So now one thing to keep in mind, this process takes about 15 months, okay? But you have up to 24 months if this is a new project proposal. And NIFA likes to have projects start October 1st, which is the new federal fiscal year. So keep that in mind as you're planning this out. Okay, the second key point is to write the proposal like you would any grant. So think about all those important aspects that you put into place as you're writing successful grants. And really, one of the key things here to keep in mind is to really have a strong justification for the issues, how you're going to address them, and especially why this project has to be done from a multi-state perspective. I've been a part of a multi-state research project for over a decade now, and I've been through several of the rewrites, and this is one of the things that we always get back in the comments. So justify the project and justify why it has to be done from a multi-state research perspective. Another key ingredient here is stakeholder support. So if you have good connections with industry groups or farmer cooperatives or whatever it may be, get their input on the project and incorporate that into your proposal. That's going to be very important, and it's something that the reviewers think is essential for the success of your project. So keep that in mind. Follow the format as you would with any kind of proposal that you're writing. You're going to see when you get into Appendix A that there's some specific requirements. So follow those formats and use plain English. Now, the reason for that is that those two levels of administrative review, you're probably going to have people on that committee that may not have a good conception of your specific topic area. So write like you would for a broad audience for any other type of grant proposal. Another good idea is to think about using the logic model system when preparing your project. And the reason for that is that all these topics that you have here in the logic model system are going to be part of your proposal. So keep that in mind. Use this as your part of your planning documents. Finally, finding resources. There's going to be all kinds of resources out there for you to look into, but I want to point out 3 that I think are going to be key to your success here. So the first one, of course, is the logic model. Many of you have probably used the logic model for your USDA grants, but if you haven't, here's the website for it. You can go down here to a link that gives you a template to the logic model. And what you'll see is that there's further directions on this web page or guidelines on how to develop those logic models. So use those in the planning process. It's going to make writing the proposal a lot easier. Another key website to look for is the Southern Association of Agricultural Experiment Station Directors. They have general procedures for new projects. They give you this bulleted list of what you have to do. There's other information on here to keep in mind, and they also provide a link to the NIMS system. Finally, you're going to have to create an account in NIMS, and you're going to use the project proposal link to input key information in Appendix A and to set up your new project. I think really what's important here too is this directory tab. That's a little misleading. You might think it's a directory of people, but actually what it does is it takes you to the list of important forms. And here you're going to see an Appendix A link. This is going to take you to instructions on how to fill out Appendix A. It's going to give you specific instructions for each section of the proposal. Appendix E is going to be used by the experiment station to add participants from different experiment stations to the project. So that's not something that you necessarily have to do yourself. You'll get help from the experiment station doing that. 2 other key appendices, Appendix G and Appendix H. Download these, review these with your writing committee. This is how the reviewers are going to look at your project and what they're going to be looking for. So understand what they're going to be looking for and make use of that. So I've briefly gone over and highlighted 3 key ideas that I think can help you create and submit a new multi-state research project. And we've had limited time here, so we've kind of come to the end of the presentation, but I hope that this information helps you begin your journey towards a new multi-state research project. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hector. That was an excellent presentation. And in fact, I actually sit on a multi-state project, and it's for department chairs and heads of horticulture departments across the country. So it's actually more national than it is regional. And one of the duties that they give us is to actually go in and review other multi-state projects when they do those annual reports. So thank you for walking us through that procedure and how to actually come up with one and actually coalesce a group to actually do that. Okay, so the third speaker up this morning, we're going to get a unit leader's perspective on mentoring faculty through the report project process, and Dr. Blair Siegfried.
Thank you, Dean. Hopefully my shared screen is showing up. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Both Hector and Dana gave some really important information regarding how to get these projects set up. My comments are going to be a little more general and not as specific, but just some perspectives on why I think these reports are important, not only to individuals, especially newer faculty, but also as a unit, why we have to have these projects. Dana already pointed out what a report project means and why it has to be a part of all research faculty here at the University of Florida. Hector described multi-state projects and how to get those set up. I think it's worth mentioning that as a new faculty member, it's possible for you to join existing multi-state projects, which can be helpful and important to you, as well as establishing a Hatch regular project that is associated with your position. And again, this is information that Dana already discussed, but really we're talking here about having access to those capacity funds, those federal dollars that come to the University of Florida as a land grant institution. And it really is an important accounting function that allows Dean Gilbert and his office to allocate fundings. And also as a unit that often your unit leaders are gonna be demanding that you get your hatch projects established, because it really influences the amount of money that comes down to your individual unit and allows those unit leaders to allocate those funds. Again, there's a lot of resources available to you for getting these projects established, and I think Dana did a great job describing how to do that. And also, she described why these report projects are important from the standpoint of giving yourself eligibility to some of those internal funds that are available from IFAS research, whether it be equipment grants, Ordway Swisher, biological station starter grants, the new faculty grants, and others as well. And since I've been here, there's been initiatives on global climate change, invasive species, and probably others that I'm not thinking about right now, but are only eligible to those folks who have a established report project. But I think from the standpoint of a new faculty member getting started in their programs, it really allows you to establish a 5-year outline of what it is that you're going to do. And as a new faculty member, I think it's really critical that you have a roadmap of how you are going to establish your program, where you're going to direct your efforts in terms of writing new grants, establishing funding, attracting graduate students to your program. This 5-year outline is very important. In terms of getting started, I would say that you need to take your time to some extent so that you have a better understanding of what your expectations and responsibilities are, but don't procrastinate. Don't let it go on too long, because time will get away from you very quickly. And if you don't do this and intentionally try to establish your report project early on, it may get away from you, and then these programs come along and you'll say, well, why can't I access these? It's because you procrastinated and didn't make a start. The other thing I would say about these projects is that the idea that perfect is the enemy of the good, these projects don't have to be perfect. They need to be general enough to give you the opportunity to move and be agile in taking directions for your research. So it doesn't have to be perfection at this point, but again, it's a roadmap. In terms of initiating these projects and why I think it's important that you take some time initially, is it gives you an opportunity to know who is available to you for establishing collaborations. I use this example of Peter DeGennaro and Don Dixon from our department. Peter is a very molecular focused researcher looking at the interaction of plants and nematodes. Don has been one of the best applied nematode pest management researchers for 50 years. And so when Peter got here, he identified Don as a really important collaborator because he wanted to take his molecular research and use it in applied ways. And you know, so not only within your departments, but around IFAS, understanding who is available, who can help you in your research. Another thing that is important is that you get to know what resources are available to you as a new faculty member. If you are doing work in the field and you need to have access to field plots, equipment, or greenhouses, knowing that the Plant Sciences Research, Plant Sciences Research and Education Center in Citra is available to you. If you're more molecular in your focus, the ICBR and the resources, the core facilities that are available there. If you need high capacity computing capabilities, then Hypergator is a resource that is available. And again, thinking about your report project and identifying the resources that you need to be successful is very important. Dana talked about, as you initiate your research or your report project, that at some stage it will have to be reviewed. And I think it's important to identify reviewers that really have your interest in making you successful. And I think some of the best reviewers on these report projects are members of your mentoring committee, who really are going to give you honest and meaningful feedback in their reviews of your report project. And then I'll just finish by mentioning that as you develop a project, it's important to remember that you don't want to get too caught up in details at this point. It is a roadmap. It is a way for you to identify the components of your research that are going to meet your job description, that are going to allow you to be successful and competitive as you move forward in your careers. So I would say keep the objectives, keep the focus not too focused, keep it broad so that you have some maneuverability, some agility in the kinds of research that you are doing. Don't be too specific and promise too many achievements at the end of the 5-year period. You want to, again, have an opportunity to describe what you do very broadly. And if you keep it so focused, then you end up going in a direction that really isn't meaningful to your report project. It's going to be harder to justify that work. And then allowing some space for growth. Again, keep it general enough that you have opportunities to move in different directions. Keep your options open. And then lastly, I would say that the efforts that you put into defining your report project should be leveraged for that first big USDA grant or NSF grant. It gives you an opportunity to explore the literature, be able to identify some of the needs that are associated with your job description, and again, have a successful research career here at the University of Florida and be successful, which is what we all are hopeful for in our new faculty. I would also say that, you know, these report projects are 5 years and must be rewritten after 5 years. So a lot of my comments are directed at new faculty, but it's the same for faculty who are starting a new report project. And every 5 years, I think it's really good to reevaluate where you are, to come up with a new roadmap for the next 5 years and really think proactively about what you want to do and how you're going to be successful as you advance through your career. So I think, Dean, that's about as much as I wanted to say, and be glad to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Blair. We'll wait for the Q&A session because we're already starting to develop some questions in our box there.
Great.
Okay, so you unshare, and then I'll introduce the fourth speaker of our session this morning. Dr. Matt Cohen from SFRC is going to talk about Mcintyre Stennis.
Go ahead and unmute myself.
All right, there you go, Matt. We can see your screen.
Which screen can y'all see?
We can see them all.
All right, how about that one?
There you go, perfect.
Oh, that's better. All right, so hello everybody. Sorry that this is all virtual, but I think it's been great information so far. I was asked to speak about the Mcintyre Stennis program. That was the small sliver of the pie in Dana's presentation. I'm faculty in the School of Forest Resources and Conservation and do work with water and trees. So you'll see water and trees as a sort of photographic theme through this. So what the Mcintyre Stennis funds are capacity funds, just like Hatch and Animal Health, like Dana described. They're funds to all of the land-grant universities, the Ag Experiment Stations, in particular for Mcintyre Stennis to support forestry research. One of the objectives, of course, is to try to initiate collaborations with federal scientists like those in the U.S. Forest Service or other USDA, NRCS, so on and so forth, to try to build the capacity nationally. And with the specific goal of ensuring that our forest industry is supplied with future scientists to sustain the viability of long-term research programs, which can be particularly important in slow-growing crops like trees. And just to underscore sort of how important the Mcintyre Stennis funds are, I mean, Florida's forest industry is, you know, nearly half of the state, $16 billion industry, 130-odd thousand jobs, and a lot of it is private. And so in addition to supporting sort of the big companies that are forest industry, there's a lot of outreach, engagement, research targeted towards private landowners. And so Mcintyre Stennis is really one of the vehicles via which we sustain those programs. And so like all of the other capacity funds, Mcintyre Stennis is required of all faculty with a research appointment to go through this initiated process where we propose a project, a 5-year project. The project starts, it's subject to approval and review like all the others. We supply progress reports every year and then a final progress report at the end. In the case of Mcintyre Stennis, often it's the case that our faculty in the school are required to, because we engage with human stakeholders, IRB, because we engage with animals, ICUC approval. So those are part of the approval process. And so the project development, if you have a research appointment, you got to have one. And so there is definitely a part, and for many years I sort of viewed it as a formality, maybe an irritating formality. As Dana described, the report has got a long name, just call it the report, but it is fundamentally the mechanism via which we convey to the federal funders, USDA, who we are, right? So we have this mechanism to create an inventory of experts about for whom questions might be posed, what we do, and how we impact our stakeholders. At the end of the day, this is sort of part and parcel of the land grant mission, that we are trying to be of service to our stakeholders in society. And so in many ways, the report is a way to convey the progress that we've made to the feds on fulfilling the research goals or the goals of the Mcintyre Stennis program. So and so from the individual faculty perspective, even though the process seems and sometimes frustrating, maybe a little bit arbitrary or banal, because we're ending up setting overarching programmatic goals. These aren't funds that we see directly. They're funds that the university sees to support our salaries and our programs. But it is, I think, as Blair was just describing, really an opportunity to think big picture about your research program, to set overarching programmatic goals, to seek stakeholder input, to make sure that you're crafting a program at the university, either as a new faculty where you're trying to understand what it is you're going to do, but even post-tenure faculty where you might be wanting to recraft the direction that you're taking, or more senior faculty where maybe you're trying to move into a new area or change the emphasis from technical research more to engagement with stakeholders. It is really an opportunity to set that 5-year plan. And so with all credit to Rodin, I thought that it really, I think the point that I want to make, that I want you to go away from, is that there are a lot of administrative details. Dana did a great job sort of describing them, Hector as well, for these multi-state programs we have, but it is a 5-year scope. It's an opportunity to think about a 5-year scope of your work. It is subject to expert review, and so it is not truly a formality. People should be critically evaluating the work, and I'd say because there are expert reviews that have to happen, one thing that will inevitably come up is that you'll be asked to provide an expert review. And I think it's important to take that somewhat seriously, to hold this is a program that we want to hold each other at least somewhat accountable on the rationale for the research, so justifying why it is that the scope exists, the objectives, the methods, the personnel. As you write it, thinking of it as a research proposal, I think might be useful in the sense that it has a rationale, it has objectives. But I think Blair's point that you want to keep it really broad is enormously important. You want to thread together the different research themes that exist in your program, either the ones that already exist or the ones that you're imagining will exist. This might include also curriculum development, extension programs. I think folding those in to your report project can be really important for ensuring synergy amongst all of those different aspects of our programs. And because having a report project is necessary to ensure internal funding success, to ensure funding success with USDA and NIFA, I think it is, obviously we want to be strategic about how we think about this project. And so I basically used the opportunity to talk about this to reflect a little bit on the things that I had done in my most recent report project. And they echo, thankfully, a lot of what Blair just said, which is that, when we specify a scope, being too specific, too focused on particular outcomes or particular research efforts is probably not the appropriate place for this strategizing. We want to think about something broadly inclusive. For me, it was thinking about forest management meeting water quantity and quality goals. That is, relatively vague. It allowed a lot of pieces to fit, but it was also possible to articulate a rationale for that because forestry is part of both the solution and the problem when it comes to regional water quality and quantity management. And then the other thing that I did, and I think this is maybe good advice for mid-career faculty, is that you already have a series of projects that are going to be producing outputs. And to the extent that you can mesh those into the language of the overarching report project, I think that's really important. So that's both for ongoing projects, but for new faculty, what are the first several proposals you imagine submitting? What are the first several dissertation topics you imagine wanting to recruit a student on, and making those the threads that tie together within the context of the report? I think it's important at the outset to not be too specific about the outcomes of the reports, because like Blair said, and it's really, you want to leave yourself some latitude for things to evolve, for, to learn about, from stakeholders about what the key issues are. Perhaps, you get lucky and you get one part of it funded and not another. And so if you're too specific about the objectives, it can be problematic to come back to those proposals and describe what it is you did. So if you're specific sort of about broad objectives and specific about outcomes as you get to the reports, I think that's probably the appropriate way to think about where to be specific. And then, of course, like anything else, we're just basically setting out an accountability for ourselves with these reports or with any of these. And so ultimately, we go out and we do that work. We publish, we train, teach, and engage. One of the things that I haven't heard said that I think is actually a really simple and easy but important part of this is that we do, as a university and as your program, receive funds from this. And so when you publish a paper that is within the realm of these broad report projects, I think it's important to acknowledge support for that effort, both for your colleagues to understand what the mission of the land-grant university is if they're not at one, but also so that that funding is appropriately acknowledged and it's clear that we're taking the funding seriously and that we're grateful for it. And so those short comments are all I had to say. Dean, I guess this opens it up for questions.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That was actually a great point to make at the end about basically acknowledging your hatch project. So unshare your screen, and then I'll invite all of the panel members to unmute. And I guess what I can do is, leading moderators, just kind of walk through some of these questions in the Q&A, and then I'll leave them up for the panel to decide who wants to actually address them. So the first question says, since multi-state projects do not bring in significant amount of funding, how do we find collaborators? Hector?
Yeah, so you could actually search projects and I think you could search Appendix E for different multi-state groups. So that's one way of doing it. And also, looking through your network of collaborators and other people at other institutions that might have similar research interests. I know that I was invited into the group that I was through folks that had started the group, a long time ago. They said, "Hey, you're doing seed biology research in Florida." They sent me an invitation, and that was it.
Yeah, and then I also know on the NIMS website, if you go on there and look for each multi-state project, you're going to have a list of all the participants there. So you automatically generate a list of collaborators, in my opinion.
Yeah.
To kind of go along those lines of multi-state projects, another question says, our multi-state groups have found that the 1890 land grants are not eligible for multi-state hatch funding. Are there other funds that are allowable to access and collaborate with the 1862 land grant faculty? Dana, do you know that?
I had not heard that, and as far as I'm aware, they're able to use our multi-state funding, and sometimes there's hatch funding and multi-state, and we get for both programs. So their group should be, the only exception would be if it's not a research project. Sometimes there's projects in NIMS, multi-state projects that are just set up for collaboration, and maybe, because they're the development committees, things like that. If they're not a research project, you don't need a corresponding report project, and thus you would. So that's a separate. If it's not if it's like a committee project, then they do not right now qualify for a report project. It's only the research projects.
And
Okay.
Dean, we've had 1860 members in our multi-state project.
Yeah, I thought we did too on my multi-state project too with the chairs of horticulture. Another question, and this is probably for Dana as well. One of the viewers asked, do we get actual notification of the annual report that's due? Does that come out of your office as a heads up?
We usually send out, a reminder around maybe January, February. I don't think anything, it could, some years NIFA will send something out. It feels like some they don't, but usually our office will send out something, just kind of giving everybody a heads up that it's due on March 1st. It's always due March 1st though.
Mm-hmm. Okay, to make sure Blair's still paying attention, another viewer asks, we always hear about hatch funds. How do we access them?
Good question. I think sometimes faculty are not aware that they probably already have access to hatch funds. As a unit leader, I'm allocated money from the research office every year, and those monies then are distributed to our faculty that have an established report project. So that operating dollars that I can allocate to an individual faculty member, those are your hatch dollars. And sometimes those hatch dollars are tied up in salaries as well. So you are accessing those hatch funds, although you may not actually know it.
Okay, kind of go along those lines, Blair. Another viewer asks, how do we construct a budget? And is it like an ordinary grant budget? And I remember when I was putting these things together, and when I asked that same question, they said the budget was kind of funny money. Just throw it in there and we'll give you what we have.
Yeah, I think that it's important to be realistic about how much it's going to cost to conduct the research that you're proposing. Recognizing that it's going to be up to you as an individual to make up the difference between what is available to you in your salary and your operating dollars or technical support if you have it. The budget really is a way for you to identify the resources that you need to make your proposal successful, not necessarily that they're going to be available to you.
Right. One of the last questions could probably be for Matt or for Dana. Matt mentioned it in his presentation about actually acknowledging the report number in your manuscript. So how would you go about doing that? And as far as the Office of Research perspective, is that something that you guys certainly encourage and look for when we submit our publications?
I'll go ahead and answer that. Yes, absolutely. Whenever a project gets approved, and NIFA actually puts in the email the verbiage they want you to use when you acknowledge them. So absolutely in all publications. And that is also a question on your progress report. They're going to ask what kind of publications were produced under, under this project, and did you acknowledge? So that is a question that they ask.
Mm-hmm. Another question says, if I have an NSF grant, should I describe this in my report project, or should I only focus on the USDA funded projects?
The NSF grant should be in there as well. NIFA understands that not all funding or their capacity funding will not completely fund these projects, and they know there will be other sources that is going to be used under the scope of your research. So go ahead and mention that one as well.
One of them that just came in, can a report project be used to develop a competitive and focused NIFA proposal later during the 5-year period?
I would say yes to that. I know a lot of these. This is in general. It's a 5-year scope of work, so it would be obvious that eventually, that would lead to other. This research would lead to other competitive grants as well. So absolutely, I think you could.
Okay, for the group, another viewer asks, when you pick between a multi-state or a hatch project, which one would actually have more substantial benefits, having a multi-state project or having a hatch project?
Well, really that depends. I mean, a hatch project, a multi-state project, you're joining a group of folks that are under the same scope of work. So a hatch project, though, that's your individual scope of work. That's why we have such a big portfolio, because they don't have others maybe in their field that are doing exactly what they're doing. So I think it really depends. It depends.
I would also just say that as a member of a multi-state project for nearly 20 years, it was a great opportunity to meet annually with other members of that project, so you could exchange information, develop collaborations within the group, and it's just a great opportunity to be part of a bigger effort.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo what Blair's saying. I started in the multi-state group as an assistant professor, and the connections I made were amazing. Some of the more senior researchers in the project mentored me. That led to joint publications, joint grants, successful grants. And now as I've kind of moved through that, I have the opportunity to do that to the new folks that are coming in. So there's benefits all the way around. We've shared equipment between experiment stations. We've organized international meetings for our societies. So there's a lot of benefits to the multi-state groups.
Great. Okay, I think we're at 8:55, so I think it's the end of the session, because I know they wanted to build in kind of a break between these forums sessions this morning. So I just want to thank all 4 speakers for just excellent presentations and backgrounds on your perspectives on the report project. And I also want to note that we have 128 participants. So that is fantastic. I couldn't imagine trying to squeeze almost 130 people in one of those little small rooms at the Hilton. So I think we did a really good job at exposure this morning. So thank you all again. Really appreciate your efforts and what you do for IFAS, and certainly your participation in this forum.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll start the next session. All right, welcome back, everybody. For our second session, we have Doug Archer as moderator. Doug?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. As advertised, this section is going to focus on the various research sections in the Tnp packet, which is a pretty tall order. So each of the participants or the panelists here will probably be focusing on something that they have seen in their experience. So we're not going to capture each individual section of the research parts of the packet, but rather each of our distinguished panelists will speak to their experience in judging packet quality and provide you helpful hints of what they believe the best practices to be. Hopefully that'll serve as fodder for generating some really good questions, and specific questions can be asked at any time of individual panelists or the whole panel. And Damian, Dr. Adams has volunteered to sort of shunt those questions to various panelists as the need arises. So I want to start by saying that each panelist was chosen for several reasons. First, they have all been through the Tnp process for sure. And next, each of them is a highly accomplished researcher and a leader in their field. They're recognized as being fellows in scientific societies, editors of journals, and having scores of publications in top-tier journals. And last, each of them has served on one or more IFAS Tnp committees, and thus have closely examined many TNP packets. So I'll introduce each of them as they appear. And so I'll start with our first panelist. Our first panelist this morning will be Professor Jamie Collins of the Food Science and Human Nutrition Department. Professor Collins is an expert with 25 years of research experience at the interface of physiology, molecular biology, genetics, and nutrition, and the expanding field of nutrigenomics. Dr. Collins' research program solves fundamental issues in human nutrition and physiology, and he is an NIH-funded investigator and chairs many NIH grant panels. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
All right, Doug, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today, and good morning to everybody. I have 3 slides with some text on them that I'd like to share with everybody, but just a few introductory comments here. Our intent today is to each provide our individual, possibly unique insight into the T&P process. We intend to go beyond what you might hear at a typical T&P workshop. And so the main question we really want to address today, at least from the research side, is what do I need to do to be rewarded with tenure at the University of Florida? As you all know, it requires excellence in 2 areas, and I can tell you from my experience on the T&P committee that certain splits can be problematic and challenging for some people. If you have a 50-50 research teaching split, well, that's easy. You really get to focus on 2 things, even 25-75. But some of the individuals we've reviewed on the panel before have 10, 20, 70 splits, for example, 70% extension. That becomes quite challenging, but keep that in mind. You really need to show excellence in two areas. Another key point I want to make is that in people's experience serving on the T&P committee, the criterion for promotion and tenure at the University of Florida has gotten more stringent in recent years. And I can tell you that the competition is quite robust. Having spent 1 year on the committee so far, I'm just absolutely amazed at what some of our colleagues are accomplishing. So the competition is quite challenging. So what I'd like to do now, can I share a screen? There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to make a few key points. It's really in no particular order. I think other individuals on the panel will probably follow up on these things. First point I'd like to emphasize here is that you cannot hide marginal job performance. You've got smart people that are reviewing these packets, their experience, and 6 years is going to go by very quickly. So you need to be thinking about how you're going to get tenured and promoted early on. And this is a key point that I think Doug likes to emphasize as well, that excellent job performance, however, can be masked by a poorly conceived promotion packet. So how you put that packet together is very, very important. You want it to look like others. You don't want it to be a standout and have some quirky aspects to it. But it is very important. So make sure you put the effort into really putting forth a quality document. And really the most important thing, one of the most important things, is that you're in a really strong position at your 3-year review. So that 3-year review is specifically to help you determine if you're on track to eventually make tenure. Okay, and we look at some 3-year packets and we have serious concerns at that point. So you really, at 3 years, you'd really like to be in a position where you can sort of parlay your success and your continued success into that 6th to 7th year so you can get tenure. But please pay very close attention to the critiques provided. You'll get critiques generated by the IFAS Tnp committee, your department, the dean's office. These are very important, so pay attention to those. Your packet and job performance could be reviewed periodically by experienced colleagues. This would be a very good idea. Even some of the associate deans are happy to look at these things in advance and give you advice. A mentoring committee, I think, is very important. So hopefully all of you would have a mentoring committee, and that should be made up of more senior, experienced faculty that have been through this and can help you and guide you as you go through this quite challenging process. So make sure you have a mentoring committee. And I would say at a minimum, make sure you're meeting with them once a year. Another important point, I think, is to accentuate and emphasize the most important accomplishments in your packets. You really don't want the reviewers to miss these. So if it's important, make sure it's in there more than once. If it's there one time, it's very easy for somebody to miss that. You want to avoid undue redundancy, but you can, for example, list it in the grant section or in the publications section or in the presentations or international activities section. Then you can re-emphasize that in your research statement. So make sure that the most important things are there more than once, again, while avoiding too much redundancy, and that way people are not going to miss these. You don't want people to miss the most important things. Much like when you write a grant, it should be very clear. There should be no ambiguity. There should be no misunderstanding. The clearer, the more straightforward, the more easily understandable, the better. You're going to have a host of different people with different backgrounds and different committees looking at this. You want to make sure that what you've written is not just understandable by an expert in your field, but by somebody in sociology, somebody in other water and soil sciences, whatever. You have no idea who's going to be looking at it, but make sure that it's understandable by a wide audience with different backgrounds. My experience looking at these packets is one thing that's oftentimes very confusing is the grant funding. So make sure that this is clear. So what is really your contribution to each of these grants? Are you a PI? Are you a co-PI? What's your percent effort? How much of the budget are you specifically capturing and bringing into your program? What's the IDC return rate on these? These are all very important points. So make sure that that is very, very clear. I found this in many times quite confusing, ambiguous. I don't think people are trying to hide things, but make it very clear. People are going to see through things if you're trying to be deceptive. Journal impact factors. These have come up on the committee multiple times. Some people put a lot of credence in these, other people don't. Numbers are important as well, but in many cases, the journal impact factors are really field specific. So if your field of whatever it is, the top journals, the journals associated with the scientific societies and the nonprofits, et cetera, those journals may not have a really high impact factor compared to other fields. So make sure that you put not only your journal impact factors, but other things you're doing in the context of the field and what other top-notch scientists, academicians in that field, what they're doing and how you're closely modeling their success. And then finally, I think it's very important that you actually understand the peer review process that you're undergoing here and the functioning of the committees that will review your packet. One thing, and I don't think this has changed, at least not to my knowledge, your specific split may determine who the lead dean and the lead dean's office is that reviews these things on behalf of IFAS. So if you have a 50% research appointment, that's going to be the research dean and the associate deans in that office. If you've got a 50% or more teaching appointment, that's going to be the teaching dean's office and those associate deans. So that's very important to know. And I would recommend that over the course of your time as you're developing your tenure packet, that you're in contact with them and getting their advice. And that'll just be positive for you in the long run. Okay, so that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Next up is Professor Natalia Perez of the Plant Pathology Department, who's stationed at our Gulf Coast Research and Education Center in Waimama. Dr. Perez's expertise in plant pathogens focuses on developing a better understanding of the etiology of the diseases and the environmental factors affecting their development on ornamental and food plants here in Florida. In 2008, I recall that Natalia received the Richard Jones New Faculty Research Award, and that proved to be predictive of a truly amazing career track. So with that, Natalia.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Can everybody see the slides and hear me? All good. So I would like to talk today mainly about the research narrative section of the TNP package. That's the section 13 on your packet. And I decided to focus on that because when I sat on the panel a couple of years ago, that was the section where we saw most discrepancy among the packets. So the first thing I want to point out and emphasize, and that was actually the last point on James' slides, is as you're writing the research narrative, you should keep in mind the audience and understand the process. You should not write that section only for your department chair or for the faculty on your department that know your discipline. Your packet is as it moves and the process from your chair and faculty to the provost, the expertise is going to decline, and the number of packets that people are going to be reviewing is going to increase. I sat at the panel a couple of years ago at the college level. That was a slow year because it was kind of a gap of hires. We had 30 packets to review and we had an hour to discuss each one of those packages. So it was a 3-day process, very intensive, but it was very rewarding because I got to learn a lot about all the other disciplines that IFAS has and that I had no idea actually. So you've reviewed packages. I'm a plant pathologist. I was looking at packages from animal sciences, family, youth, wildlife, and forestry, and you name it. So disciplines vary a lot, and once it moves on, you even have people from architecture or medicine. They're going to be looking in the packet. So with that in mind, I think everybody should keep in mind, like when you do grant workshops, that they tell you to follow the guidelines for one thing. Do follow those guidelines. Everybody attending these is probably attending the Tnp workshops as well, but unfortunately not everybody is following the guidelines on the Tnp packet. It's particularly for that research narrative section, I realize. And by that, I mean, we had a few packages with like 5 pages instead of the 750 words in those guidelines. And it's nice if you can give your message short and to make it easy for the reviewers. As we just mentioned, we have people from all kinds of disciplines, and you really don't need to get much into technical jargon in that section. You just want to really emphasize what's the impact of your program, and make it as easy as you can for the reviewers or for the panelists. So that said, I basically cut and paste here all the guidelines we have on the Tnp guidelines for section 13. It looks short, but there's actually quite a bit of information in that. And the very first information I'm breaking down here in different slides is that 750 words. So I really like to emphasize to everybody to try to stick, and of course if you go to 760 or 78 is not a big deal, but you don't want to go 5 pages to give your message. This is really your chance to talk about your specific contribution to the discipline. This is where you can use a first person. You can use I did, my lab did, my group did, my student did, and put it in a context on what you did and what you're planning to continue to do next, where your program is going to go next. That's really your chance to put everything in a context. There's really no need there, and we see that in some of the narratives, to have a list of publications and grants again. That's going to be later on in the package. You can simply reference to that section, see the publications. You can, however, highlight some publications and some grants that you're particularly proud about, that are really highlights of your program, but without repeating what is going to be later on that section. Jamie also mentioned about bringing up the quality of the journals you publish. That's also on the guidelines in that section, and that's like he said, really important because there's some disciplines. I'm plant pathology based on a REC, so my research is very applied, and the journals I publish, the best journals I publish, have an impact factor of 3, 4 at the most. When you send in this to people in medical school to look at, they might think that's really low. And there are some other disciplines that the journals you publish, the impact factors are going to be even lower, but those are the most important journals in your area to publish. That's where you want people to see your work published. So just make sure you bring that up on that research narrative, that you are publishing on the most prestigious journals in your area. And last, my advice to everybody is that you start working early on your research narrative. At GCREC, we usually, for our annual review, our director asks the faculty to update their TNP package, starting in the very first year, put everything in the TNP packet and update every year. So, and that is, I think, been really helpful for the young faculty, because it gives a chance for feedback every year. My next advice is that you search for good examples, and they often provide on the TNP workshop examples of packages that are successful. The provost office, I think, also has some examples of packages that you can ask for other disciplines that not necessarily yours. Share that narrative with your peers. Use that mentoring committee. Jamie mentioned about that too, and that's another chance that you should use to get feedback from your mentoring committee. And share even with people that don't know anything about your work, your family, your friends, and see if they can understand your work and the impact of what you're doing and are impressed with what you're doing. So those are my few advices. We'll have time to answer some questions and discuss later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Next up is Professor Brian Unruh of the Environmental Horticulture Department, who also serves as the Associate Center Director of the West Florida Research and Education Center in Jay. Dr. Unruh is a turfgrass scientist whose research includes water quality, pest management, and turfgrass cultivar development. Although he has no formal research responsibility assignment-wise, he has amassed a remarkable publication history nonetheless. Dr. Unruh recently chaired the IFAS Tenure Promotion Committee for a period of 2 years, which is where I got to know him better. So anyway, with no further ado, Brian?
All right, thanks, Doug. As we think about this, I think it's important to maybe get a little bit of a perspective as to what does the TNP committee actually do. You know, we don't walk into this room wearing long black flowing robes. IFAS HR kind of sequesters us, and they take the total number of packets and they divide it by the number of folks that are on the committee, and then each one of those committee members then kind of shepherds that packet through the discussion process. I didn't go back and look at numbers, but I would expect the average packet's probably 125, 130 pages in length. And so when you think about that times the total number of packets, it's a tremendous amount of reading that has to take place. And so each TNP committee member will serve a 2-year hitch. And over that 2 years, we'll review 2 sets of 3-year packets and then 2 sets of TNP packets. So it is kind of a laborious process, and so we deliberate those packets candidly. If they're really good, we kind of blow through them, and if they're not so good, we kind of move past those. It's the ones that start having kind of some of these challenges that then cause us to have to get in and really start the forensic work, so to speak. At the end of the deliberations of the TNP packets, each committee member does an assessment. It's not a vote because of the sunshine laws in Florida and whatnot, but there's an assessment that is made, and it generates a 5, 4, 2 against or whatever it is for the field for the rank that they're pursuing. Then we come together and meet with the deans, and so all the deans and the associate deans gather around, and we very quickly work through every single one of those packets, discussing the strengths and the weaknesses. And I will tell you, I'm just in the 2 different periods of time that I served on the Tnp committee, I was just really impressed that the deans know these packets. They have spent probably much more time than even the Tnp committee deliberating, working through these things. And so we may make a statement, and when Doug was in the dean's office, he said, well, but on page 26 of that packet, it says this, and that. And you're like, really? And you go back and look at 26. Oh, yep, we missed that one. And so, and then they gather their information and they go back and they prepare the dean's letters that then allows the packet to proceed. And so, anyway, so I've just got kind of a couple things that over the 4 years that I've served, I think just some of my insights. And first, I think we have to be very cautious in how we navigate the conflicting messages that are coming from or through this process. And there are conflicting messages. Okay, so you're going to have your mentoring committee, you're going to have your colleagues, your unit leaders, your deans, your VP, and the provost offices. You're going to gain or receive a lot of guidance, whether it's solicited or unsolicited. And I think you have to vet that information and consider the source. And so there are stated requirements, and there are those things that aren't stated. And one of the stated areas that I think are often overlooked in the packet, and there's one in section 9, which is the teaching, one in section 13, which is the research, and one in section 24, which is the extension programs. And each of those 3 sections say all tenure track faculty members are expected to contribute to the teaching, research, extension mission of IFAS, regardless of budgeted appointments. And so, as was stated earlier, you have to demonstrate excellence in 2 areas, but there better be something in all 3 major sections of that Tnp packet. Those are stated requirements that are there. Now, there's some things that aren't stated, but they still kind of bubble up. For example, I had a colleague of mine who upper administration said, you must be a PI on a federal grant to be successful. Well, I thought about that a bit, so I said, I'm not sure, and it's not stated anywhere. But I actually went back in that year that I chaired the committee, and I was surprised to find that 60% of the assistant professors were in fact PIs on major federal grants. And so it's stated at some levels, but it's not in those guiding documents. And so another one that is stated when I first served on Tnp committee back in 2011 and 12, when the Tnp committee got the marching orders, they came in and it said, PhD students are great. You really should have a PhD student. In my most recent time of serving on the committee in 2017 and 18, senior vice president came in and said, you must have a PhD student. Now you go over to the guiding documents, whether it comes from the provost office or from IFAS, you won't see that written in stone, but I think what we've seen here is those are metrics of a top tier university. And so don't try to be a renegade and get through the process without a PhD student. Second, obviously, I'm off campus at a research and education center, have been for my 25 years at IFAS, and things are different at an off-campus research and education center, but the Tnp expectations are not. So don't be lulled into thinking just because you're at a research and education center and you have all of the producers in your region think you're the greatest thing. There's still some expectations that are there. And so one of the things that I really encourage my colleagues is that, as you're on campus or you're traveling around the state, to swing in and realize that you have folks that are going to assess your Tnp packet that are all over the state. And that's especially true in departments that have faculty that are dispersed across the state. Environmental horde, agronomy, entomology, nematology, for example, have a tremendous number of faculty that are based at the research and education centers. And so consequently, those folks all have, they get to mark a ballot on your success. And so make sure they know who you are. not just late in the process, but throughout the process. Engage your department chair. If your department has seminar series and those things, make sure that you are before the faculty that are there. I think as we get into these packets, and as I said, there may be 40 or 50 packets and 125, 130 pages. We start in the process, if anomalies and peculiarities start popping up, that leads to a little bit more of a forensic evaluation, digging in deep, trying to figure out these anomalies and peculiarities. Maybe you transferred into the process midstream and you had a negotiation with upper administration that you were able to transfer those years of service into IFAS. Just communicate that, articulate that as best that you can. As an example, we had a packet one time where a professor had a tremendous number of graduate students, but you went over to the research section or to the publication section, and only 2 of those students actually had ever published anything. And so, I mean, there were literally dozens and dozens of graduate students. Well, what wasn't communicated very effectively in that packet was that those were non-degree or non-thesis students. And I think you just need to when we're kind of starting to connect the dots, it's important. Also, we've had several years ago had a packet with a tremendous number of graduate students, but it had a very limited number of sponsored research dollars. I mean, really low. And so I think an explanation there is, how were these students paid for? How, were they self-funded? Did the foreign governments that maybe these students, originated from, did they pay for that? But just to provide some clarity and don't leave those big question marks hanging out there. Another point, to whom much is given, much is expected. And, and in a sense, kind of what is the return on investment of you, the faculty member? Personally, I'm far more impressed by a faculty member who, with limited funding, has figured out to have an impactful program with students and publications and all of those that come along with it, versus somebody that maybe inherited a long, very productive breeding program with just tremendous royalties. And so when you come up to that Tnp packet and you look at it and you say, whoa, they've had just millions of dollars. And then you look at the return on that millions of dollars, and it doesn't really become quite evident. And then second to the last point is if you're one of these that maybe started off your career early as in county extension and then earned the degrees and then became a faculty member of a state specialist or something like that at the University of Florida, in your packet, make sure you draw a very distinct line as to this is where I was maybe involved in county extension, this is where I was became a graduate student in this program, and this is where I became the professor. And how do you delineate between what was my role as being mentored by a professor, and now that I am a professor, what's my contribution there, and draw those hard lines. And my last comment really is I have to attribute this to Jay Farrell. Jay and I've known each other for many years, and we served on the Tnp committee, and he made a really good observation that I think is valuable, that from a rank of assistant to associate, have you demonstrated in that packet that you are a scientist or an educator? Have you demonstrated your ability to get grants and to publish and to train students and to educate? But then that rank from associate to full, really, have you shown that you're a scholar? Editorial boards, international reputation, invited speakers, not just more of the publications and grants, but really that you've shown yourself to be a scholar. And so, and you'll hear a word oftentimes, and we talk about trajectory. And I think that's extremely important from that associate to full range. Are you on a trajectory to continue to be highly productive and demonstrating your value? So with that, Doug.
Thanks, Brian. Hopefully that even generated questions from me. So it's going to be fun when we get to that section where we address some of these questions. The next speaker is someone who you've been seeing all morning already. is Associate Professor Damian Adams, who also serves as the Interim Associate Dean for Research. He's an economist and a lawyer and is in the School of Forest Resources and Conservation with a joint appointment in Food and Resource Economics. Dr. Adams' research program includes examining climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies for southern forests and the socio-ecological impacts of managing new water standards. So, Damian.
Great, thank you very much, Doug, and thanks everybody. So what I want to talk about is, thinking about how you're framing the packet for multiple audiences. And as a social scientist, one of the challenges that I've faced is, one that some of the speakers mentioned as well this morning, which is this idea that across different disciplines there can be fairly dramatic differences in expectations in terms of journal impact factors and citation counts and that sort of thing. Well, I'm not sure what happened with my slide here. It looks a little funny, but we'll just go ahead and roll with it anyway. So the first point is think critically about the Tnp landscape, right? So we've already heard that there are a lot of different folks involved here, a lot of different audiences. You've got your external letter writers, you've got your chair, you've got your senior faculty that'll be voting on your packet, you've got the deans, you've got the department committee more broadly, the IFAS committee, the academic personnel board. And as you move through this landscape, are going to be very different sort of experiences that these different audiences are going to be drawing from. And it's important to seek help, seek advice, training, get input. And as you're gathering all of this information, try to take it all with a grain of salt and just understand that there are going to be many different perspectives that are going to be shared with you. And what you essentially want to do is try to triangulate on sort of what's true for your specific position with the appointment split that you've got, with the discipline that you're working from, and with the kind of programs that you're trying to build. And I think this links to a broader need to sort of find and sustain strong mentoring relationships, and to really have a sort of a critical kind of inquiring mind about the landscape that you're working through. And so as you're thinking about the Tnp packet, and this is probably more for sort of the junior faculty, thinking about the third year packet and the tenure packet. So one of the needs that you have is you want to make sure that you've got a document that reads well. It's clean, it's clear, it's understandable, that basically anybody from any discipline could spend some time with and get a sense of what your impact is on science and within the institution here. So you want to avoid overly technical language. It's helpful to share the document with your colleagues, to even share it with family members and others. And the more that others have an opportunity to engage with you on the packet, the more refined it'll become, the easier it'll be to understand. And beyond that, you'll have some needs in terms of making sure that the document fits the technical standards for IFAS and for UF. So formatting, style, word count for particular sections, et cetera, and guidance on the focus of sections that we heard that Natalia talked about. The Tnp workshops are great for this. And so as you engage with those, and one of the nice changes about the workshops this year is that they're focused in on specific career stages. So there's a separate workshop for tenure, separate workshop for going for full, et cetera. Thirdly, in terms of the needs that you have for the document, you want to make sure that you're communicating that you've met you've clearly met the threshold for excellence in at least two areas. And so for this, you can lean pretty heavily on your chair, on your more senior faculty members in your unit. You can get some of this guidance from the IFAS Tnp workshops as well. Chris Haas in the Provost's office has provided some great information. He's got a nice talk and a presentation that you can engage with on the Provost website, the page for tenure. But you'll notice that as you sort of move up through the through the institution, the guidance will become a little more vague as you go. And I think what you're going to find overall is a few things. We've heard this morning about the changing expectations by level as you go from third year assistant to associate and associate to full. There are those different expectations in terms of how you've been growing your program and demonstrating that trajectory and blooming into this, as Brian mentioned, this true scholar ultimately at the end. You need to have a packet that speaks strongly to your focused contribution in research. And so this is speaking to letter writers. This is speaking to folks in your discipline. And I think you can lean on your mentors. You can lean on your colleagues, whether they're at UF or not, that are in your discipline to help give you the kind of feedback that you need about whether your packet is speaking to that and how well it's doing that. The landscape can change over time. That's something that we heard this morning. So you'll want to think about that as you're engaging with, particularly your more senior faculty members, that they have their own unique perspective, they have their own experiences, and it's possible that the last time that they went through this process was many years ago, unless they've served on the academic personnel board or the IFAS Tnp committee. So you want to just bear in mind that some of the guidance and feedback that you're getting might be good and well intentioned, but it might not exactly fit the most recent guidance or even the template of the document. We now have a service section in the Tnp document, which is something that we haven't had before. So you want to make sure that you are checking in with the workshops and working from the most recent document that's available. And we've also heard this morning, I think this is very important. The packet is not just a reporting document. It's not just it's not meant to just be a bulleted list of the things that you've done. There are elements of it that really should come across as a strategic plan. And this is something that we heard quite a bit from Associate Provost Chris Haas. And he really likes to emphasize the need to tell a compelling and cohesive story. And he says you need to really build a brand around your research program and your teaching program, build credibility, vision, describe the mission of what you do as a scientist under those first two packet sections, in the job duties and the areas of specialization. He says that's the spot where you really want to define your scholarly mission and your specific vision for what you do. You need to show distinction in the areas that are assigned to you, and that's important. So telling a cohesive story, guiding the reader through, as we've heard this morning as well. You don't want the IFAS committee or the academic personnel board to come to their own conclusion about whether you've made a strong contribution or whether you've demonstrated excellence. It's important to note that given how diverse these audiences are, particularly as you end up engaging the academic personnel board, sort of at the end of the process, you're going to be dealing with folks who don't have a strong sense of your own discipline, and you have to essentially define your own yardstick for success, and you have to advocate for your own packet. So be a strong advocate, make the reviewers' jobs as easy as possible, document impact, and what's really critical is that you provide context for everything. Really show the committees how you've checked all the boxes. Those outside of IFAS might not even know they're split. I think that's pretty common in liberal arts and sciences. And it's likely if you've got an extension appointment that they don't understand extension, or in sort of the more applied worlds of research, they might not understand what an applied scientist does. So provide strong narrative that helps them understand, helps them really get the context of what it is that your research program is doing, and how it's truly excellent. It's important to brag about yourself, but be factually accurate. Again, context really matters. So you want to focus on how your work demonstrates excellence, how you stand out from the crowd, what you do better than most, how you make truly outstanding contributions to scholarship, to science, and to society. It's difficult. Scientists are typically taught to sort of remove ourselves from the story when we write journal articles. We want to let the science stand on its own. And that's a great way to communicate in scientific articles, but it's not a great way to communicate in your Tnp packet. And so, really focusing on telling that story and helping the reader see where you stand in this narrative, or sort of this hero's adventure, can be very helpful. The social sciences, I just want to talk for a second about that. There can be a lot of different ways that you can assess scientific excellence as a researcher, and we've seen a lot of emphasis on H-index, on journal rankings and ratings, on citation counts, that sort of thing. And it's really important in the document to help the reader understand what is excellent for your discipline, for your field. For the social sciences, typically the citation counts are much lower. Typically the life sciences are going to experience roughly 2 times higher H indices than the social sciences. And what's important in this context is to just help the reader understand what the benchmark is, what the yardstick is. And there can be some different ways to do this. There's an annualized version of the H-index that can be used to essentially flatten out that curve. And so that is the quotient of the H-index over the years since the first recorded citation. And there can be other ways to do this too. Chris Haas talks about how what he did was when he was putting together I think it was his promotion packet to full, that he calculated the mean H-index for the top 10% of his field, and then compared himself to that. You can also use Google Scholar. There are research keywords in Google Scholar, and you can look to see how you stand in terms of the ranking with respect to your peer groups, and that's a really useful tool. And what some people do is they show perhaps a figure of the cumulative citation count, and if there's a strong upward trend, so if it looks anything like Florida's COVID cases, then you're in great shape. But it's just one of those situations where you want to think about what it's going to be that is going to help tell your story. Is it going to be an H-index? Is it going to be comparing to sort of the ranking for the Google Scholar keywords? Is it the total citation counts? Whatever helps tell that story is where you want to go with that. And with that, Doug, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Damian. I'm just going to add one thing, or 1 or 2 things. First of all, I never said I'm Doug Archer. I've been here for 26 years as a full professor, and I served for 10 years in the research dean's office. And in my time as department chair at the research dean's office and 2 years on TNP committee, I figure I have seen, read, and in some cases written letters on behalf of some 500 TNP packets. And I have to say it's been the most rewarding part of my being here, is to get to know the faculty of IFAS that intimately in terms of what they do. What I'm getting at is something, I'm going to feed off something Natalia said, and that is, if you get a chance to serve on the TNP committee, do it. A lot of times I heard things, well, oh my goodness, don't serve on TNP, it takes all your time, blah, blah, blah. I'll tell you, that's really not, in my view, being a very good citizen, but it's also not true. It is a rewarding experience. At the time you might say a few bad words about the amount of work it is, but all in all, when you're done, it really, it is something that you'll remember forever. The other thing I'm just going to say real quickly is the packet is your responsibility. It's not your chair's responsibility. Chairs are busy people. They'll help you. Other people can help you, but in terms of the overall responsibility, the packet is yours. And so accept that right up front. Do your best work on it. Don't take shortcuts. Get as much help as you need, as much advice as you need, whether that's from IFAS HR, whether that's from senior faculty on your mentoring committee, however, but seek out that advice, but realize it's ultimately your responsibility. With that, Damian, you want to see if there are some questions?
Yeah, Doug, I think I see one that is still remaining here. If you have a 10% research appointment, is it still expected that you are a PI on a major federal grant, not for tenure, but for promotion? And I think, was it Jamie that had suggested that? Or maybe that was Brian. I think Brian, you had suggested that. In the context of sort of these unstated requirements.
Yeah, so that I think, Heidi, I think that's an unstated requirement. And to me, as just one who'd served on a TNP committee, I wasn't so much, what's the packet say? I mean, if you're figured out how to generate, funds to support your productive program and you're not listed as a PI, as a faculty member serving on a TNP committee, that had little bearing for me. Administration may say something different, but as one, just reviewing a packet and determining whether or not you've made the case to be promoted, it's the whole packet. It's not, singling out one funding source versus another.
Yeah, Doug, let me just comment real quick. So I made a comment on some of the appointment splits that we saw on the committee. And if you had a 10% research appointment, I would hope that would not be one of, I hope that would be one of 3 splits you had. Because, particularly the ones we saw where somebody was 70% extension, maybe 20% research, 10% teaching. So you're spending 70% of your time on your extension appointments. Well, how are you going to show excellence in research or teaching when that's a very minor portion of what you do? So some splits are quite challenging in that way. And a 10% research split, yes, this would be a big challenge if that was the area where you needed to show excellence. It would be quite challenging.
Okay. I just wanted to add something. There was an earlier question about expectations of associate to full professor. And I think for a long time, the word was international. That was what you had to show, that you were internationally recognized as a scholar, that you had an international program or an international component to your program. And that was one of the big things about that leap in rank. I just want to say that, for you folks that have not attained the rank of full professor, the international thing is probably going to be a very, very different landscape than we've seen in the past. With COVID-19 now almost worldwide and international travel restrictions, I wonder what the expectations will be, how we will adjust, how we think about that. And I was thinking this morning, because I looked at the news before this session and talked about how the Bahamas have now forbidden travel from the United States to the Bahamas. And I was thinking one of our professors in microbiology and cell science, Jamie Foster, her program is in the Bahamas. So what's she going to do? I mean, it's right now, it's time out for her program. And of course, almost everyone with a research appointment has had a timeout because of COVID-19. So it's going to be a very challenging time, and it's going to require a lot more effort on everyone's part to figure out how we're going to proceed and how it will impact this process of tenure and promotion.
Thanks, Doug. I see a question here from Dr. Lisa House. What do we do when IFAS guidance doesn't match guidance from Chris Haas's office in the provost office? For example, he recommended changing section 4, that's where you report your effort, to match section 2. That's where you report your brief description of job duties. When things like grants end up pushing section 4 effort percentage towards research when the person is heavier extension.
I think the highest ranking member of this panel needs to answer that one. That would be you, Damian.
Yeah, so yeah, what I've heard from Chris Haas is that section 4 needs to be less about your formal split and more about how you've actually spent your time. And so if the reality is that you've got a very heavy extension appointment, a very light research appointment, and yet you've been spending a much larger proportion of your time on research than extension, I'm not going to say that that's an issue, but it is something that probably needs to be explained. But that section 4 really is meant to be a more accurate snapshot of how you've been spending your time. And section 2 is meant to be a good description of how it is you should be spending your time.
I think as well, to add to that, I think this is a place where the unit leaders' letters can be very effective in helping to communicate where that imbalance occurs. And so, if somewhere along the way, maybe, it's COVID-19 and your program had to dramatically shift, the unit leaders can articulate that in their letter. And many do that very effectively. I go back to, I think it was 2007 or 8 when the budget cuts and Department of Ag, FDACS withdrew a lot of funding support. And we had to kind of maneuver through that, in the TNP process. So.
I think we have time, Doug, maybe for one more question. We do have one here from Gerard Qureshi, and he's asking about the research narrative. To fit everything into a 750-word research narrative may not be easy with all the things mentioned to include. Is it okay to say that I have published in the most prestigious journals in my subject in the range of impact factor instead of talking about a couple of journals specifically? What are the thoughts there? Broad guidance, or is it better to have broad strokes or specifics? I have an answer, but I think I'd defer to the committee on this.
Jamie's still around?
Yes. I would use it, and I'm sure Natalie can comment as well. I would use it as an opportunity to highlight the most important thing that you've done. Everything's listed elsewhere. You could mention the number of publications, the average impact factor, the sum of the grant funding. So sort of take a broad stroke and hit the most important highlights again. I think this is an opportunity for you to really re-emphasize the important things that are elsewhere that may be lost in a huge long list of stuff. So this would be the place to make sure that is not missed, and that concise summary of that could be provided there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's okay to be broad. You have your list of publications later on and your list of grants. So I think it is okay to be broad and really emphasize the highlights. It's not by any means a narrative of your whole career and everything you have done. It's really to be highlights of your research. And you're right, it's only 750 words and only so much you can fit. So there's no need to talk about every single thing. You can and should be a little more broad on that section. And that's what it makes hard to write, because you always feel like you want to put every little thing.
Unless I'm mistaken, sorry about muting myself. I think we're almost at the end of the session, Damian. If you want to have a break between now and the next one. So I really enjoyed being moderator of this session, and thank you, the panel members, for bringing your insights of much experience to this panel. And we're always here, so write down our names, and if you have questions, email us. That's probably one easy way to get some answers out of some folks that you've seen the faces before. So, Damian, anything final?
Oh, thank you very much, Doug. Thank you to the panel. This is great discussion. I just want to remind everybody that anything in the Q&A will be shared with all the panelists, and if there are follow-up thoughts or comments, we're happy to answer those. Any of those questions offline. We can post those responses on the Dean for Research website. So even after this session is over, please feel free to share your your comments or your questions in Q&A, and we can follow up on that. Let's all take a few-minute break and come back at 10 o'clock for the session on writing accountability and other NCF-DD programs with moderator Brian Bonning. Thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to this third session of the IFAS Research Forum on writing accountability and other NCFDD programs. My name is Brian Bonning, and I am going to serve as the chair for this session. I will be presenting along with two other faculty members from the Department of Entomology and Nematology, Drs. Rachel Mallinger and Andrea Lucky. And I would ask them to turn their videos on, please. So first of all, by way of introduction, I'm an eminent scholar in the Department of Entomology and Nematology, working on biotechnology for insect pest management. I also serve as the director of the National Science Foundation Center for Arthropod Management Technology. I received my PhD from University of London and was a faculty member at Iowa State University for 22 years before moving to University of Florida in 2017. Rachel Mallinger is an assistant professor. She works on pollination, ecology, and conservation of wild pollinators. She received both of her graduate degrees from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and also arrived at University of Florida in 2017. Andrea Lucky is an assistant professor. She works on the evolution, biodiversity, and invasion biology with a focus on ants. She received her PhD from UC Davis, did a postdoc, North Carolina State University. She arrived at University of Florida in 2012 as an assistant research scientist and then became tenure track in 2018. She has received a number of awards, including the University of Florida Creative Campus Award for three-dimensional insects in art, and numerous teaching awards, including the 2017 Educator Award for the North American Colleges and Teachers of Agriculture, the USDA New Teacher Award for 2019-2020, and more recently, a US Fulbright Scholar Award for the study of entomology education in the Czech Republic. And indeed, for our panelists today, Rachel is tuning in from Minnesota, and Andrea is taking part from the Czech Republic. So I will start with a brief presentation on what can the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity Programs do for you. You may have sat in on a session in June on work-life balance, and I really feel strongly that the framework provided by the NCFDD is essential for effective work-life balance. So University of Florida joined the NCFDD in January of 2019, and actually I was the one that petitioned for this because I felt so strongly about the power of this program. So just reading this from the faculty update, it's a nationally recognized independent organization that provides online career development and mentoring resources for faculty, postdocs, and graduate students. So just to emphasize that point, despite the name of the National Center for Faculty Development, this is not just for faculty. This program offers excellent resources for graduate students, including the dissertation success curriculum, for postdocs, and for administrators, in addition to the faculty members themselves. In case there is anyone sitting in today who has not activated their membership, I just want to take a moment and have you do that right now. And in recognition that some of you may be observing from a single screen, I'm going to talk you through it. So if you will go to your web browser and enter facultydiversity.org/join. So facultydiversity.org/join. You can then select University of Florida from the drop-down menu, select Activate My Membership, and then complete the registration and enter University of Florida email address. And then you will be able to activate your account from the confirmation email that you receive. So please go ahead and do this, and this will allow you to browse through the programs that are offered. So resources available are listed here. They include the weekly Monday Motivator. This is an email that comes into your email on Sunday, actually, but really has some excellent subject matter. The monthly core curriculum webinars, guest expert webinars. There are multi-week courses. As I mentioned, the dissertation success curriculum for graduate students. There are various discussion forums. They have accountability systems, a 14-day writing challenge program, and then numerous resources available in the member library. So just to highlight the first few of those, I do recommend signing up for the Monday Motivator. Some of these really cause you to stop and think and review actually how things are going. This is a schematic of the core curriculum. So this core curriculum is designed to operate as a year-long virtual mentorship program. So there are monthly sessions. They're intended to increase your writing productivity and work-life balance. Although they hold these live on a monthly basis, they also have recorded versions of these, so you can watch them at any time. So first of all, we start typically in January with every semester needs a plan, following with develop a daily writing practice, overcome academic perfectionism, move from resistance to writing, align your time with priorities, academic time management, the art of saying no. So here's the work-life balance. So the time management and the art of saying no are two that are really good if you're having issues with work-life balance. And then healthy relationships, cultivating a network of mentors and sponsors, engaging in healthy conflict, managing stress and rejection. So we are here in the year. As I mentioned, you can watch any of these online once you've registered, but August 13th at 2 o'clock will be the live session on cultivating a network of mentors and sponsors. And of course, the advantage of attending the live session is that you can actually send in specific questions of the presenter. Here are some examples of guest webinars. You can see they covered pivoting to online teaching, adapting your strategic plan amidst uncertainty. This is a result of COVID-19. How to challenge race and gender bias in student evaluations. All of these past guest webinars you can watch. The recordings are available online. So in addition to the core curriculum, they also have a faculty success program, is a boot camp. For this program, it's quite intensive. There is a fee of $4,750 per faculty member. If you are interested in doing this program, the deadline is coming right up on the 24th of July. And here is an example of one of the multi-week courses on P&T materials. So on a personal note, I'm a big proponent for investing in yourself so that you are as well equipped to work efficiently to do your job as possible. I particularly recommend the Every Semester Needs a Plan. This stops you from doing anything else for an hour to an hour and a half to identify what your goals are for the semester, both personal and professional. So in addition to completing grants and manuscripts, you might also have your exercise routine in there. It also encourages you to assign specific times for those tasks. The overall concept here is that a lot of what we do as academics, writing grant proposals, teaching, service, these all have deadlines. And the one thing that gets put off fairly consistently is manuscript writing. So there is no deadline for manuscript writing. So I had worked with this NCFDD for a number of years before I came to University of Florida, and I did the every semester needs a plan, and it was really helpful. But what really makes it effective is if you also implement accountability. So our accountability group in the entomology and nematology department was established in January of 2018. And as the writing accountability, the focus really is on manuscript writing. I selected a group of women who had majority research appointments in the department. At the time, 2 assistant research scientists, 2 assistant professors, an associate professor, and myself. So the idea here is that each week we would meet for an hour. We would each list 2 to 4 specific goals that we have for the coming week and report on the progress from the prior week. So initially, of course, this was done in person. If you were traveling, you'd send an update by email, and now this continues via Zoom. We also identify a specific celebratory milestone for the semester. So this worked so well, I felt like it was a bit like a clinical trial, that if the drug cures the disease, then you need to offer the control group too. So in 2019, we expanded to include men, which has, I think we've involved 13 or 14 different people within the department, but 5 assistant professors and lecturer. They set off with separate meetings, and now we have combined meetings. I will comment that the men seem to have had less commitment overall than the women to these accountability groups. So in addition to the main goal of accounting for our writing efforts, we also share resources, and some of these will come up in later presentations. When to Do Everything by Daniel Pink, time tracking document, and then of course logistical advice. You know, I've had a manuscript submitted, I haven't heard anything, it's been 4 months, what do I do? Or local logistics, that kind of thing. And one of the resources that I particularly like to share is this book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less by Greg McCown. This was written primarily for industry, but it applies very well to academia as well. So finally, just to show this again, encourage everyone who's attending to register for the NCFDD programs. They really do provide an excellent resource. So now I am going to pass the screen over to Rachel. And I would encourage people to submit questions in the Q&A as we're going through this. Okay, over to you, Rachel.
All right, great. Thank you, Bryony. Hopefully you all can see my screen here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about semester plans. Bryony introduced these, but I'm going to talk about my experience with these semester plans. And then some of the common pitfalls that we have encountered, I've encountered, as well as other members of this accountability group for managing writing. And then finally, just end with my experience with accountability groups. So I'm going to touch on some of what Bryony has introduced, but I'm going to hopefully share a little bit of my personal experience. And just to clarify, I've been a part of this accountability group that Bryony mentioned. So I'm one of the assistant professors in this group, and I've taken advantage of some of these resources via the website that Bryony shared with you all and encouraged you to join. So the first step in creating a semester plan is to outline your goals. And this is an example that the website will share with you when you go through this exercise. Again, as Bryony mentioned, it's, I believe, about an hour-long exercise. So I participated formally in this the first time I did it, and now I just do this on my own every semester. But the first step is to break down your goals and break them down, including writing, but other goals as well that may come in the way of writing or stand in the way of writing and that you need to accomplish in that semester. So here, this example has it broken down by writing, research, teaching, advising, service, and then personal, which Bryony mentioned can be a really important thing to incorporate in the semester plans. So I do this each semester, and I tend to have a few different writing goals. Any upcoming grants that I know have deadlines within that semester or that I'm working on get added to this, but then also manuscripts. So writing tends to be, for me at least, manuscript and grant proposal oriented. Research is activities that I need to do in the field, planning, organizing research projects, administrative activities, and then of course teaching, and if you have an extension appointment, extension. So this is another example then of the next step in the semester plan, which is to break it down into a schedule. So this is some researcher somewhere at some university, their semester plan broken by week. So in the week of January 6th, this person has indicated how many hours they can spend writing, which also looks like it includes some research activities as well, any deadlines that week, and then what they're going to do sort of on a day-to-day basis. So this is just an example of what basically taking those semester goals that you've outlined and then putting them in a week-to-week schedule can look like. This is another example, maybe slightly better organized, at least in my opinion, of what it can look like to put those goals into a weekly schedule. So here the person has the semester broken down by week, and then the writing and research tasks that they'll do each week, and the amount of time that they'll spend on it, and the day when they will do that. And then also has included some personal tasks here in a separate column. I wanted to share some of my semester plans. This is one that I did very early on. I think one of my very first semesters here at UF. I had 3 different writing goals, a few research goals. I was doing a lot of field work, collecting preliminary data for proposals, and then some personal goals, including having some evenings with no screens. And I rarely ever accomplish my personal goals, but I tend to do a little bit better on the writing and research. So I know I need to work on my personal goals. But these are the goals, and then basically I took those goals and put them into a weekly format. So each week of the semester listed here, those writing goals, research goals, and other. And I think this is a really important step. For me, it helped me see where I would have weeks where just too many things overlapped. So maybe that was a week where there was a grant deadline, or a week where I had to do particular field work, or a week where there's a conference. I would be able to see, oh, I have too much scheduled in this week, I need to move things around. So I find this to be a really important step in the process. And then I don't have any sort of image for this, but then the next step, for me at least, is to take this and put it into my calendar. This was a Google Calendar. I've now shifted to Outlook, but basically taking these and putting them into Outlook. And I try to be very specific in scheduling these tasks in my calendar. So there'll be certain times during the week when I'll work on each of these tasks. And I generally do this a few weeks in advance. I find if I wait until the week of, I have too many meetings and other things that clutter the week. So I try to schedule my weeks a few weeks in advance to make sure that I reserve that writing time. So some tips for the semester plan are to work backwards. If you do the seminar, I think they encourage you to work backwards. So again, starting with those semester goals, which is the first step, figuring out what you need to do to achieve that goal by the end of the semester. And so you can do this with the visual, like shown here, where you write your goal in, and then the steps that you need to accomplish to reach that goal by the end of the semester. Again, making sure you schedule big events in your semester plan that can help you realize where you need to shift things around, being very specific about your weekly tasks, and then also building in flexibility. So in my semester plan, will build in a few weeks for sending a paper to co-authors, for example. And then when I know that I have that paper sent to co-authors during those 2 weeks, then I know I can focus on something else, a different writing task. And I try to keep co-authors on my schedule, but of course they have their own schedules too. So you need to build in flexibility there. So some pitfalls that I've encountered, and I think many others in the accountability group have also struggled with these. The first is how many writing projects to juggle at once. And I think this really depends on stage and research program. Some members in the accountability group, especially more senior researchers, tend to tackle just one thing at a time and maybe spend 1 to 4 weeks on that manuscript to get it out the door. For other faculty members that may have research projects in earlier stages, maybe spending more time on a given manuscript, maybe that manuscript has to go back and forth a few times with co-authors. It may be better to juggle a few writing projects. But I think we generally try to, as Bryony mentioned, have just maybe 2 to 3 main goals. So having 6 writing projects or 7 writing projects that you're working on at once, and Andrea, I think we'll talk a little bit about task switching as well, that can reduce success. The second thing that I personally have struggled with are writing tasks with deadlines versus ones without, as well as writing tasks with accountability versus ones without. So grant proposals typically have deadlines, although this isn't true for many NSF proposals, but the USDA proposals and internal grants have deadlines. And then documents that you're working on with students, student papers and proposals, those tend to have accountability. And so you want to get them back to the student or the co-author. And so I found that I need to basically not prioritize those things, or at least make sure I'm prioritizing the writing projects that don't have deadlines. So I schedule those first, and then I basically make the grant proposals and the student stuff fit into other slots. They will get done. I know they'll get done because they have deadlines, and I'm not going to leave my students hanging, but it's the things without deadlines that won't get done. So I basically schedule those first, and then everything else secondly. So I'll end by just sharing a little bit about my experience with accountability and writing groups. I am part of this accountability group. Here's a picture of some of us on our end of the semester celebration. This was when we could all meet in person and not have happy hour over Zoom. So Bryony mentioned we do these end of the semester celebrations, and certainly this group has provided a lot of support and friendship, also dealing with tricky situations, politics, logistical issues. Some of the things that we do that Bryony didn't mention, we report yeses and nos, and we encourage each other to say no. Of course, we have to say yes to a lot of things. We have to be good citizens of our departments and universities, but we also get asked to do a lot, and it's important to be able to say no. The book that Bryony mentioned, Essentialism, also encourages you to focus on what's essential and to say no to what's not. So we report on our yeses and nos and try to hold each other accountable for that, hold each other accountable and encourage each other to say no. We report on our goals for the upcoming week and then also what we've accomplished in a given week. And we try to be very specific. So not just, did you work on this manuscript, but what did you accomplish? Did you finish the introduction discussion? So being very specific, I think, is helpful. And meeting regularly is helpful. I will say that 1 hour a week is a pretty big time commitment, and there are definitely times when I've questioned whether it's worth it. It's a decent chunk out of the week, but in the end, I think it has been really, really beneficial. There are a number of times we meet on Friday afternoon, and there have been a number of Friday mornings where I've realized I said I was going to do this. I have 2 hours until we meet. I better do it now. And I don't think I would spend my Friday morning working on the introduction to a manuscript if it weren't for the fact that we have this accountability group in 2 hours. So I do think it's helpful, but I recognize for many people, 1 hour every week is a big time commitment. And so there may be some resistance there and some hesitation there, but I would encourage you to try it out. It has been very helpful for me. And then finally, writing groups. My lab has tried this out for the first time this summer. So this summer we're meeting 2 hours weekly. We're meeting every Wednesday morning for 2 hours. I think that's probably a minimum. We may increase that to 3 if we do this again. It's been really helpful for my lab. I did it for the graduate students, but I found it very helpful for me as well. We all agree that it's the most productive time of our week. So we meet over Zoom, of course, for now, and we do a very quick check-in. So we limit this to 5 minutes total. So each person spends 20 seconds saying, I'm going to work on this for the next 2 hours. And then we work for 2 hours, and then we have a brief checkout that's a little bit longer, and we deal with lab logistical issues as well. So we meet for 15 to 20 minutes at the end. And that just provides some structure. I think we all work really well when we know we have just 2 hours, and we try to get as much done in that 2 hour time frame as we can. And it builds in some accountability as well, because we have the check-in and check-out process. There are various ways to structure this, of course, but I think it's helpful not just for graduate students, but for faculty as well. So that's all I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I believe Andrea is going to speak next on scheduling time for writing.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. And just as Andrea gets her screen set up, I will just add, although we meet weekly, this is not a requirement. It depends in part on the size of your group. I think with the size of our group, we have sufficient members that we always have a critical mass each week. If you had 2 to 4 people, you might choose to meet every other week, for example. Okay, over to you, Andrea.
Thanks. Thanks, Rachel. I'm Andrea Lucky. I'm an assistant professor in entomology and nematology, as Bryony said. And I'm going to be talking about finding time to write. And I'll be building on a number of things that Bryony and Rachel have mentioned. So all of us are busy. It's hard, even if we know an accountability group like the one that we've been speaking about is helpful, it can seem like just an inordinate amount of time to commit. And I think the same is true for some of our projects that are some of the most important things that we do, which usually come back to writing. I personally know this because my appointment is a 70% teaching and 30% research appointment. And the immediacy of teaching always takes precedence. And so for the first several years that I was in my position, I didn't really have time to write. I was working on projects, getting my program established, and I was developing courses, teaching courses, revising courses, and it just seemed like there wasn't time. And so I really felt that there wasn't time to write. But the truth is, like everything we do, we are the ones choosing how we spend our time. And so this accountability group has been particularly helpful with the NFC, goodness, I should know this acronym by now, but with the faculty development programs, some of their webinars have been extremely helpful to me. So let me just give you a little bit of a description of some of the process of finding time to write, because all of us, I'm sure you are out there thinking, this is something I can do, but I just need some tips, because we certainly can. So the first question that is really essential to ask yourself is, how do you spend your time? We all spend our time somehow. It's the same amount of time that we all have. And some people seem to be very efficient about using their time. And others of us sometimes feel like we're being pushed around, battered by the wind of demands. And one of the things that we can do, although I certainly did it with some resistance, is actually account for our time. So a couple of years ago, this was a suggested approach to getting my priorities aligned with my time, was to do some time tracking self-assessment. Literally going through your day, and I did this for 3 weeks, keeping track of what you're doing and what sort of category it belongs to. So just to give you an example of the categories I used, I had research activities, I had teaching activities. This includes actual in the classroom time as well as preparation, anything related to either extension or in my case, a lot of outreach, writing, which was one of my priorities, students, as Rachel mentioned, student papers, editing student work, that often comes with a lot of immediacy. Students need their responses soon because they're on the timeline. But it also included things like service, email, which can potentially be a black hole. All your time can disappear into it. And then this great category of little stuff, you know, the things that come up. Somebody has a quick request for you. You need to find that data set to send it to a colleague, things of that sort, outreach, etc. You can also put in things, as Rachel mentioned, all the different categories that might include personal things, exercise, home projects, things of that sort. But when I did this, and this is just sort of a mock-up of one of my sheets from that time period, was this is a weekly schedule you can see here. And in every half-hour time block, I kept track of what did I spend my time doing? And one of the things I noticed after doing this for several weeks was that I had a lot of little time blocks. 30 minutes of this, 30 minutes of that, and a lot of email in between things. So I'd be teaching for a 3-hour stretch, and then when I'd come back to my office, well, I have half an hour before a meeting with a student, let me just check my email and see if something important happened. If I get 3 emails and I think I can just quickly answer these right now, I've just lost my opportunity to sit down and maybe do something that was really aligning with my priorities. One of the things that, at least for me, is certainly the most helpful in really getting down to focusing on writing is having protected blocks of time. And so when I look at this schedule here, if you look at the green, all those little green bars, I had green coded for my writing. My writing was always broken up into these little chunks. And just to get into the zone of really thinking about the work that I was doing, whether it was manuscript writing or grant writing, as Rachel mentioned, NSF grants are on rolling deadlines now. it was extremely difficult to think about the big picture of, what is the broad picture of this grant, or what is the pitch of this paper? How can I really frame this in a way that intersects with the cutting edge of my field? That is really hard to do when you have 30 minutes or 15 minutes or even an hour, because sometimes what you really need is a good 2-hour stretch, sometimes 4, sometimes a whole day. But we often don't have that amount of time. So once you have a chance to actually keep track of your time, or if you do a good job of this already, you know how you spend your time, the next question to ask is, does your time align with your priorities? Most of us are pretty clear about our priorities, what we actually want to get done, or the things we need to get done. And as we've already mentioned, these NCFDD webinars on time management are particularly helpful. So this one called Align Your Time with Your Priorities is especially good. I think really for this in particular, figuring out how to take a messy looking schedule like this, where a lot of time is kind of dissipated moving between different kinds of activities, and trying to focus a little bit more on protecting the time for your priorities can be helpful. So it's easy to say, okay, here's a schedule that I'm going to make. I'm very good at making schedules. I'm sure many of you are as well. You make a schedule, and then what happens? Well, lots of demands come at you from all different directions. And at the end of the week, or at the end of the month, or the end of the semester, perhaps what happened during the semester didn't resemble anything like the schedule you set out for yourself at the beginning with all those good intentions. It's easy to have that happen. So this is where the reflection comes back. Consider what works well for you personally. Nobody can give you a schedule and say, hey, this is going to work for everyone. It's not one size fits all. And one of the things that I found particularly helpful, and I know Bryony has mentioned this, Rachel, maybe it's worked for you as well, is actually figuring out the times when you are having your best writing success. So I'm a morning person. If I can have a block of time in the morning when I'm fresh, I can be much more productive. At 3 in the afternoon, it's better for me to be answering semi-mindless emails or doing some other tasks that don't really require a lot of deep thinking. The same thing when I look at the week. I do a much better job of writing in long stretches in the beginning of the week rather than the end of the week, because by the end, I've had too many meetings, my brain is full. I need a little bit more fresh time for thinking. So one of the things that I did is, after I had done some time tracking, was I actually set out my schedule and looked at just the things I really wanted to include there. So I blocked out my teaching, I blocked out my lab meetings or meetings with students when they had to be at those particular times. And then I prioritized writing, putting it into that schedule. And so I put writing in the morning, and then I looked at some of the other times during the week when I thought it would fit best, when I would have actual blocks of time. And then I scheduled it. And then I had to protect it. And this is a really difficult part. And this is where another one of these webinars is actually really useful. And this is the art of saying no. So once you get to the point where it's time to schedule what your priority is, there are going to be things that are non-negotiables, but then the others, it's nice to be able to try to do some arranging. So because I was interested in really improving the amount of efficiency within my own writing, I knew that the other things would get done, my meetings with students, my teaching, my preparation for the classroom. I made a schedule that was specifically about writing. And so rather than keeping track of what I was doing every day, I started to keep track of just the amount of time that I spent writing. So here's a nice, messy, real-world example of one of my schedules where I had a weekly track of my writing. I had a goal, and depending on what was happening that week, whether I had some particular deadlines or something else that was taking up a lot of my time, I might actually adjust my goal from maybe 6 hours of writing time to just 2 or maybe more. And then I just filled it in with my little green pencil, and I tried to tally it up at the end to see how well I was aligning my time with my priorities. Now, this is really a little bit of a different focus from what Rachel was talking about, which was, here's the task, you want to get it done. Here's this part of the manuscript you want to write. Here's this part of the grant you want to write. In this case, I was just trying to prioritize time for writing, just to protect it. And so I made a schedule. I tried to stick to the schedule as best as I could, but then I also kept track of how well I did just by tallying it up at the end. And so one of the things that ends up happening, of course, is if you are asked to take on a new project, somebody invites you to be a reviewer for a paper or to sit on a panel, you may need to say no, because every time you say yes to something, it's going to be taking away time from some of your other priorities. So this art of saying no turned out to be something very useful. Just like you have to calibrate your own time priority so that if you can work well in little chunks, that's great. Some people like to write 30 minutes every day. Other people, like myself, need longer stretches. If you have a hard time saying no when somebody asks you to do a task, one of the things that was most useful for me, just at the beginning of trying to prioritize my own work, was simply to say, I don't know, let me get back to you in a day. And so that's just an easy tip for getting started and not immediately saying yes. And a lot of times, yes comes out eventually, but at least trying to consult with the schedule, figure out if the thing you're being asked to do aligns with your own priorities, can be very helpful in that kind of focus. So some of the resources that Brian mentioned before, this book, Daniel Pink, the Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing, talks a little bit about figuring out what your best timing is in terms of time during the day or during the week, trying to figure out when you can be at your most productive. Also, there's a podcast, an NPR podcast listed here about the same book by the same author. And then this book, Essentialism, I think that basic idea really is about focus on the thing that's important to you. And it's very easy with our busy lives and lots of demands on our time to feel like there just isn't time for these undeadlined items. But when we look at our Tnp packets, for example, these often are the items that are the measures of our performance. So I hope that's been helpful, but I'm going to pass it back to Bryony so we can answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. And to follow on from what Andrea was saying about the art of saying no, a tool that I use is actually to have a document with a table, date, what have you been asked to do, what did you say, yes or no, and justify why you said that. And just the act of forcing yourself to justify and write down, why are you saying yes to this? You know, it can become very clear whether or not you should be saying yes or no. So. Okay, so a question here from Vincent Lacour. I find it challenging to put my graduate students in the calendar. Their needs for input and revisions from me are not super predictable, and by trying to be a good mentor, I often end up spending my time working for and with them instead of working towards my weekly semester goals. Do you have any recommendations or insights? Rachel, do you want to have a go at that one?
Sure. So I have a few things to say. I currently have 4 graduate students and 1 graduating soon, but 2 coming on board this fall. So I will have a brief period of time with 6 graduate students in my lab. So I'm definitely dealing with this issue as well. One thing that I do is again, schedule time for sacred writing time, which is the writing time that I will use to work on projects without deadlines or accountability, typically manuscripts. And then I schedule other writing time for grants that may come up, because just like these graduate student needs come up, grants also come up, sometimes with just a 4 or 5 week deadline. So I have separate time that is for graduate student needs as well as grant deadlines that may pop up. And my PhD advisor did something similar. I believe he had 1 day a week, which he dedicated to graduate student writing. And basically he had a queue. And so when you sent him something, it went into the queue, and he spent 1 day a week working on those things in the queue. Sometimes, depending on the length of the queue, he would get back to you in a week or 2. Sometimes it would be 1 or 2 months. And so I think we do want to be good mentors and get back to our students quickly, but there may be times where it takes a little bit longer. So having a queue and prioritizing from top to bottom when you receive things from your students, and dedicating time every week for those sorts of things. Another suggestion would be to think ahead too. So I tend to know when my students' proposals are coming up, when they may have a grant that they need to submit. And if I know that it's going to be a busier semester with those sorts of things, then maybe I reduce my own goals a little bit. So I think, you know, you can look ahead a little and try to adjust based on that. And then finally, I do meet with my grad students once a week from 30 to 60 minutes per graduate student. And I find this helpful. We work through documents together sometimes during that time, or we work through analyses together. And so I think that reduces the amount of time I spend looking at their documents because I have these weekly meetings with them. So that might be something that works for you or could work for you if you're not already doing that.
Andrea, do you have anything to add in terms of balancing time for students versus your own list of activities?
I'll just echo what Rachel said about scheduling time in for students every week. I ask my students to be very efficient. We call them mini meetings, and they are not required, but the students know that I have time reserved for them. And I ask them to give me an agenda so that we can be really efficient and use that time well. And then I ask them to give me at least 2 weeks lead time when they need me to review something, if they want me to give them a quick turnaround. And I think that that's been really helpful. And it also helps me remember when I have a student who contacts me saying, I need this in 2 days, it helps me keep some of my own work as a priority, because it is sometimes very hard when you have a student knocking at your door saying, I really need this, to remember, I also really need to get my grant done, get my paper written and submitted. And so then I can remind them that, no, I actually can't turn this around because, you know, this was something that you might have needed to do earlier, or maybe we talked about it prior to that. But I think it's very hard. None of us want to leave our students hanging. And I certainly tend to prioritize my students' work over my own. So scheduling them and giving them some rules of engagement is very helpful.
Thank you. So AJ Sharma asks, what if everyone learned the art of saying no? And I'm going to chime in here that we're not saying no to everything, but we are putting limits on what we say yes to. So for example, I limit the number of graduate student committees that I'll be on to 10. And as a rule of thumb, you kind of want to review 2 or 3 manuscripts for every one that you submit, because every one of yours is going to be reviewed by others. So we're not saying no to everything. Does anyone want to add to that? Other comments? Andrea?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about that, which is that I once got some advice from someone early in my career, and I admired the work that she did. And I said, you know, how is it that you're so effective at what you do? And she said, I just say yes to everything. And I remember thinking, okay, that sounds like a good way to do things. And it works if you're just, you never sleep. And also if, I guess I don't know how it works, but the truth is that if you do say yes to everything, the yeses will start to eclipse the things that you really need to do. And so I do think that for people who have a difficult time saying no, for whatever reason, you don't want to disappoint people, or you just haven't quite sorted out your priorities, it's very worthwhile to sit back and think, what is your end goal? If you want to do outreach, for example, do you want to meet with one individual family once every day? Or do you want to develop programs that have your outcomes? I mean, if extension is excellent at thinking about this, what are the outcomes you're after, and are you achieving them? But I think that kind of reflective approach is one of the things that's really important. And saying no is one of the tools you need to use to get there. So if you find it difficult to say no, it sometimes is an art you need to practice.
Yeah, and I will just add that I had a similar reaction. When I read Essentialism, I had similar thoughts in parts. And I think there's a difference between saying no to things that are sort of optional, potentially fun, potentially interesting, but don't fit into your priorities, and saying no to things that you really have a duty to do. And so I consider things I have a duty to do to, you know, write letters of recommendation, especially for my own graduate students, or as Bryony mentioned, to review a certain number of papers for every paper that I submit. And so I don't say no to manuscript reviews when I feel like that is my duty. I've submitted X number of papers. I need to do 2 or 3 per paper that I submit. I'm not going to say no to a letter of recommendation. But if I'm asked to join a grant project that just doesn't really fit into you know, my priorities, then that's maybe where I don't feel so badly saying no.
So a question here about how do you manage the deluge of emails? I know, Andrea, you touched on this.
So one approach is to manage the time rather than the emails themselves, because this is one thing that sometimes emails actually resolve themselves if you don't attend to them immediately. I don't know how other people deal with this, but I try to limit the amount of time I spend on email. If I'm writing in the morning, I try not to check my email until after my writing session has finished. And then usually at the end of the day, I want to check and see if there are any fires that need to put out. But I try to resist the urge to be checking during the day when I'm focusing on other tasks, because it's just simply inefficient. The task switching is where you lose your focus. And sometimes in a desire to take your brain away from the hard work of really thinking deeply about something, it's easy to have a just quick answer to an email, but then 15 minutes later, you've lost a chunk of your writing time. That said, being efficient and prompt about responding to emails is a challenge. I mean, I don't know. I don't have a good answer to this other than I try to manage it the best I can, but I'm not somebody who can immediately respond to emails. I sometimes need to wait a few days before I can get back to somebody. And I just try to triage when there are fires to be put out.
I have a bad habit of doing emails in the evening because I know I'm not going to work on a manuscript in the evening, but I'll answer emails in the evening. Hence one of my personal goals of having a few evenings a week without emails and screen time. So I don't encourage you to use all of your personal time to respond to emails, but I do think that, as Andrea mentioned, figuring out when your periods of peak productivity are, and then doing emails during those periods when you're not productive, and maybe, you know, I can have like some entertainment on in the background while I'm doing emails, or a beverage or dessert, and it doesn't feel so much like work.
Okay, so a question here. Could the panel share other key insights and lessons that they've learned from being intentional with your time about themselves, human nature, their discipline, etc.? And has this approach affected positively or negatively other aspects of your lives beyond work? Andrea, it looks like you have something to say on this.
I'm just laughing because I'm the parent of small children, and I basically sometimes have to treat myself like a small child when it comes to tasks that I either want to do or don't want to do. It's actually quite interesting. We all need to recharge. We all have periods of higher and lower productivity. Being honest with yourself that you're not a robot is actually pretty useful. I can set very high goals for myself. I can hold myself to high standards, but I still cannot just simply be a machine and crank through and get everything done with no break. And so recognizing that, I think, has been really helpful. And I learned this lesson a lot with my kids, seeing what they're capable of and not trying to push them past it, and instead trying to, you know, make sure that they get the rest and the food that they need. And then when I think about my own productivity and the way that I can engage creatively with my own work, because my best work really comes when I am excited about the things I'm doing rather than feeling like they're some sort of drudgery. So yes, I do think that these are positive and very fulfilling products of being intentional about this work that translate to family life, to home life, and just personal life as well as work life. Rachel?
Yeah, I do think that being really intentional with your time, you know, it's taught me that I can get a lot more done in little time. And I think when I schedule and I'm really intentional about how I use my time, I have more time to do the things that are also important to me. There are a lot of them. I also have a young child, a 4-year-old, and you know, I'm not very good about achieving my personal goals, as I mentioned, but I am fairly good about protecting personal time. I think that one thing that I'm going to try to work on is, again, using that personal time to achieve my personal goals. I think I'm pretty goal-oriented in my work, so then when it comes to my personal time, I just sort of, you know, just kind of flop. And so I'm trying to be a little more intentional with my personal time, and actually try to use that personal time to accomplish those goals, whether it's spending certain amounts of time and doing certain things with my child or exercise goals. But I found that being intentional with time, I think it can really open up more time to accomplish those other goals that are not related to work. And it's been really helpful for me.
So I would add also that it's the every semester needs a plan plus the accountability group has been so important for me in just improving my overall well-being. I tend to be anxious about things that are coming up, all kinds of deadlines, but knowing that, yes, it's under control, I have time, blocked out in my calendar to get that done, it takes the stress off. And so therefore it does actually benefit life outside of work because I'm happier at work. I would also add at this point that the accountability group itself, it has a very strict function and a very set purpose, but the collegiality that has been established with the faculty, both the men and the women who've been involved with this group, is tremendous, and it makes work more fun. Before this group was established, we were all tremendously busy with our jobs. We all have too many things to do, but actually taking the time to connect, even if working through issues associated with work, has been tremendously valuable. That's one of the biggest benefits, I think, for me in terms of increasing writing productivity. So we are actually now out of time, but first of all, I would like to thank Andrea and Rachel for tuning in from their different geographical destinations. And I would also like to say that if anybody wants to follow up with further questions, I encourage you to email me. I'm happy to give you further insights as needed. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the session. Damian?
Yes, thank you very much. Wonderful panel. So thank you very, very much to all the moderators, to Dean Kopsel, Doug Archer, and Bryony Bonning, and to their wonderful panelists for this outstanding discussion today. And of course, to all the faculty and staff in attendance, thank you very much. So before we go, I wanted to remind you to, well, in addition to registering for the NCFDD site, please be sure to register for the 4th Research Forum webinar, which is being held the morning of Monday, August 24th. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a phenomenal day.